Good morning, everybody. I hope everything
Morning.
Good
is good
morning.
and I hope you're healthy and fine. Haven't seen you in 2 weeks. So let me just open the file I need and we start communicating. We will have to make up for the week with the lecture we missed last week for St. Patrick's Day. Let's see, lectures. Anybody has any questions or queries so far? Let me also just get into Moodle and see if I can place or if the lecture is there or not. Existing. Okay, so I just placed the lecture there as well on Moodle. Well, let me share the lecture notes. Okay. Okay, Alexander, how are you keeping today?
Hi.
Hi. Can you tell me, Alexander, which one is better? Public key encryption or conventional encryption systems? Or
Uh,
tell me
it's
one advantage, yeah, of conventional encryption in general.
the key. You need to share the key.
Yeah, the key needs to be shared. That's not an advantage. That sometimes is actually a disadvantage. That's probably a feature of the system. Okay. Tell me how to make Olotobi. Can you tell me how to make an encryption system, conventional encryption system, more secure? Gloria. On the top of your head. How can you make an encryption system more secure, Gloria?
Complex algorithm, increase the range of the key.
Increase the size of the key. Did you say something else before that?
Yes, use a complex algorithm to
Increase the complexity of the algorithm. So if you have the algorithm, make it more complex or increase the size of the key. How else would you make a system more secure? Anybody else? Sue Ellen, do you have any other suggestions to make conventional encryption system more secure, or any encryption system other than
use session key?
Yeah,
use a
session key, which means don't use the same key repeatedly. Why not? How does a session key provide more security than if you don't use a session key?
Because if you use the same key over and over again, you're compromising different messages, different data. And if you use session key and someone discovers it, you compromise only one message or one information.
Okay, yeah, exactly, yeah. So if you don't change the key, and then the key is discovered even a year later, all your past messages will be compromised. And also your future messages will be compromised if the key is not changed. Okay, any other recommendations to make your encryption system more secure? Marvis, can you think of any other recommendation to recommend to a company? You join a company and they say to you, hey, maybe our system is not secure. So you say, all right, increase the complexity of the algorithm, increase the size of the key, change your keys frequently, use session key. What else would you recommend to make the system more secure?
Well, I'm not sure. I think just increase if you're using depends on the cipher algorithm you're using. I think there are some basic steps you should implement to increase the safety and the security of the algorithm, like increasing the keywords.
Okay, but no, let's keep it, yeah, that's fine. But let's keep it to encryption, just encryption system. Okay, anybody else with any suggestions? Again, any suggestions to make your system more secure, to make an encryption system more secure, other than increase the complexity of the algorithm, increase the size of the key, and use only session keys, use a key once? Any other recommendations?
Maybe we can transfer the keys in a much more secure way.
Okay, maybe just to keep maybe the keys absolutely confidential, increase the safety of keeping those keys secure.
Do not repeat the key. Like once we use the key.
Yeah, Sue Ellen said that only use session key, like you only use the key once. Okay, right, we'll get back to that. What's the disadvantage? Like, what's the disadvantage of Caesar's algorithm? Matteo, Payne. Matthias?
Yes.
Yeah, what is the disadvantage of Caesar's algorithm?
It's mono encryption.
Yeah, mono-alphabetic encryption system, yeah.
So if you find the...
No, that's fine. You don't have to explain that. That's good. Any other disadvantages, any other weaknesses of Caesar's algorithm, as well as just the mono-alphabetic? What else does it, what other problems does it have?
Keys are hard to distribute.
It has a problem in key distribution. Okay. Anything else? Anybody else? Ángel or Ángel Vergez?
Key range is quite small, and the decompression algorithm is very simple and takes less time.
Yeah. Okay. So it's the encryption algorithm is very simple, and the key size is very small. Okay. And it's a replacement or substitution algorithm only. So it's the algorithm is not complex, and it would be better if it's more complex and if it was both using substitution and transposition functionalities. Okay. Right. Let's get back to me share. Let me see if we did actually. Just want to check the previous lecture. Oh yeah, no, we have another one to do. Wow. Share. Okay, just want to share the last slide just to, I want to finish that part first. So this is the same slides as we were looking at previous week. Just want to go back to the part that we were doing. We were looking at Vigenère cipher, which is non-monoalphabetic cipher, which uses an alphabet. Thank you. Okay, and we've already practiced that. We tried this, how to encrypt and how to decrypt. So to encrypt a message, we usually look at this is the actual plain text message. Any character we're going to encrypt, that will be the plain text character. And we have to select one of these alphabets based on the password, whatever the password is. So every character is encrypted by a different line or different alphabet. And once we find, let's say we're using, say, the E alphabet, and we want to encrypt the character, say, P. So we go down, we go up there to the plain text P that we want to encipher and pick that character where the column that goes down intersects with the line of the alphabet. And in this example, P, the plain text, is substituted by T as the ciphertext. And if we're doing deciphering, and if we want to decipher the letter T using the alphabet E, so we go along there, look for the letter T. This is the ciphertext, and we go up and pick the plain text. So this top line is always the plain text. Be careful, some students mix it up in an exam. So make sure you practice it at least once or twice so you know how to use the this cipher, Vigenère cipher. So there are other types of ciphers, and what we will need to look at is they are either generally transposition, as we mentioned, ciphers, or substitution ciphers. In transposition cipher, change in the position, and that will, the security or the difficulty or complexity of the key will depend on, of the encryption system will depend on how big the block is, and the bigger the block, the more the permutations. And in other systems, the transposition, again, the bigger the block, but you also change in the position will require that you need to bring back the position of the characters when deciphering. So we looked at the rail transposition cipher. Yeah, so we looked at this system, I think, as well, where we use the keyword or the password, and that would be the one that we divide the actual message into pairs of keys. That will be Hill cipher. So I looked at Hill cipher. This is just another example of another encryption system. The Playfair cipher. So in the Playfair cipher, just a quick revision again, that we take a message, we create a matrix that's made up of a password. So a password is given, and we fill the rest of the alphabet, unused characters of the alphabet, in a 5x5 matrix. And when we get a message to encrypt, the message is divided into pairs of characters in such a way that no two pairs will have the same character. So if you get two characters that are the same, as in this case, LL would have paired together, the letter X is used to fill in between the two paired characters and to separate them. So we'll never have two characters, same character, paired together. And to encrypt, we look at the matrix. For example, any character W and I, to encrypt WI, we'll locate the W and the I, and we imagine the W and the I make the corners of a rectangle, like this rectangle, WXIG, WXIG. And every character is substituted or replaced by the other character in the other corner of that box. So the W is replaced by X, and the I is replaced by the other character G in that corner or in that box. And if the two characters, let's say to replace the letter O and P to encrypt, if the two characters are O and P, they fall on the same column, then every character is substituted by the character beneath it. So A is substituted by H and P is substituted by V. And if we are to substitute the two letters C and U, or E and U, for example, if we are to encrypt those, they're on the same column. So each will be replaced by the character beneath it, underneath it. So the E is substituted by L, while the U is substituted by, and there's nothing underneath it, but it's circular, so it's substituted by the letter M. And if we are doing deciphering, every character is replaced by the character above it if they are in the same column. So that we go in the opposite kind of direction when deciphering. So if we are deciphering, say, for example, QM, to decipher QM, we first locate them. This is Q and that's M, and they're not on the same column. They're not on the same row, so they make up a box or a rectangle. So every character is replaced by the opposite corner. So Q is replaced by L and M is replaced by N. So QM are replaced by L and N. But if they were on the same column, let's say if we have the letter A and S, we want to decipher, not cipher, decipher. They're on the same column. When we cipher them, we go for the character below it, but for deciphering, we go for the character above it. So S is replaced by I, that's the character above it, and A is replaced by the character above it, which in this case is going to be X, and so on. And if they are in the same row, let's say H and D, let's say we get those two characters, HD, to encrypt them, to cipher them, we go to the right, H is replaced by Y, D is replaced by the character on its right, which in this case is going to be C. And if we are to decipher, if we are deciphering EF, for example, every character is replaced by the character on its left. So character is deciphered by the character on its left, which is, in this case, it's going to be K. And F is deciphered by the character on its left, which is E. So to encrypt, you go to the right. To decipher, you go to the left. If they're on the same column, to encrypt, you go downward, the one below it. To decipher, you go above it, the one above it. And if they are not on the same row or column, then they're substituted by the other corner on the same row, always on the same row. Okay, so this is known as Playfair cipher. We will be looking at Hill cipher, maybe the end of today or next semester or next lecture, next week. That's a bit more complex one. Product ciphers are ciphers that consist of both substitution and transposition. And that's what today's new modern encryption systems of the type that's conventional, that's the one key. Remember, today we have two types of encryption systems. We classify them based on either there being the conventional type or the secret key that both users share the secret key, or the newer type, which we call the public key, which every user, they don't use or they do not share a secret key. In fact, they use two keys, one to encrypt and one to decrypt, rather than sharing one key that does the same key, does the encryption, and is also the same key is used for decryption. Remember, so far we've been studying the conventional, historical conventional encryption systems. The both sender and receiver, or encryptor and decryptor, they use one key. They must share the same key, and the same key is used to do the encryption, and the same key is also required to do the decryption. In the modern conventional encryption systems, it's still the same basic idea, except if it's a transposition or substitution, we use both, but we still use one key to do, multiple more complex operations, but still known as the conventional encryption system. The public key encryption system is where two keys are used, one for encryption and a different key is used for decryption. We'll talk about those later on. So the opposite of monoalphabetic cipher is what's known as polyalphabetic cipher. So Vigenère is one of them, and Playfair is also another example where you don't always substitute the letter A for, say, S all the time. In the repeated character in the message will be replaced by different characters now in the polyalphabetic ciphers. So it's another approach, polyalphabetic ciphers, that improve security, is to use multi-ciphered alphabets. And that's as we did in the Vigenère. So the Vigenère will give you different time. For example, if you need to encrypt the character, say H, that comes in multiple times in the message. If you're using the G, for example, alphabet, to substitute to cipher H is to come down from H, and it will be substituted by N. But if you're using the alphabet R, a H will be substituted by X, or sorry, by Y. So anytime the character H comes in the message, it will be substituted by a different character, which makes the system a lot more secure. We've already, had example of using this Visioneer encryption or cipher system. So let's keep on going. The one-time pad is a system where only one key is used. Transposition ciphers, or we did also the column transposition cipher. This is another cipher called the rail fence cipher. I'll just show you how it works. You will not be required to actually work it out. In this example, the message is written. You write the message or the letters out diagonally. So you write your message instead of in lines, you write M-E. For example, you want to write meet something, meet me at something, or meet me after whatever the message is. So you write M-E-E-T. There could be more than 2 rows, but they will be written diagonally. See, the message is written like this. In the column transposition we did, you write the message horizontally in rows and read it in columns. Here you write, it's like you write it in columns and you read it in rows. It's the opposite, but we write it diagonally. So the message is written along the diagonals like this, M-E-E-T. That's the word meet, M-E-E-T, me after whatever it is. So the rest of the message. And then when you read it horizontally. So you take the rows now to cipher it. So you take this message as a ciphered message, we write it diagonally, and to encrypt it, you read this line, M-E-M-A-T, and there it is, M-E-M-A-T. So we write it diagonally, and we read it horizontally to encrypt it, and to decipher it, you write it horizontally and read it diagonally. It's very much like the column transposition, kind of slightly another variation of it. So we looked at column transposition. The similar one that's called row transposition. We won't even talk about it. It's very, very similar to the column transposition, but instead of writing rows and reading columns, this one writes them in columns and reads them in rows. We don't have to do it or talk about it. So, but you are required to know how to do the column transposition. So, substitution, encryption, and transposition encryption, just a quick comparison between them. In substitution encryption, symbols or numbers or alphabets of the plain text are replaced by others. So every character is replaced by another character. While the transposition, you do not. You just write the message. You don't bring anything from outside the message. You just change the position of the characters. In substitution, it can be monoalphabetic or polyalphabetic. That means the character is always replaced by the same character, or like in Caesar's algorithm, or a character like a polyalphabetic, like in Visioneer, or plain text, or what is it, the other system we looked at. So polyalphabetic, that means a character is sometimes replaced by one character. If it's repeated, it's replaced by a different character. In transposition, keyless and keyed transposition ciphers are the main types of transposition ciphers. So sometimes transposition is it doesn't use a key, and sometimes it, well, obviously most of the time it uses a key. In substitution cipher, monoalphabetic substitution encryption, the letter frequency can detect the plain text. So you can actually attack that system using the letter frequency in the language. So that's it's called cryptanalysis. So cryptanalysis can be used to attack monoalphabetic system. That's another problem with Caesar algorithm that earlier on we asked, what are the disadvantages of Caesar's algorithm? Caesar's algorithm is a monoalphabetic system. So monoalphabetic, so every character is always replaced by the same character. So it can be actually attacked using the cryptanalysis. And the cryptanalysis is a technique that's used based on the fact that every language, all the documents written in that language, they follow the same frequency count for its character. So the letter in English, the letter E is the most frequent character. So if in a ciphered message you find that the most frequent character is M, you know that then M must be a replacement for the E, and you can break it down that way. So this only happens in substitution ciphers. Transposition is slightly different. It doesn't work on, and it also doesn't know. It only happens on substitution ciphers that are monoalphabetic. So in substitution encryption, character's identity is changed while the position remains unchanged. So we always deal with the same character, but its position in the message doesn't change, which makes it a little easier to attack. Okay, it's not, even if it's not monoalphabetic, you know, the second character here, for example, in this ciphered message refers to the second character in the original message. So, you know, you can play with it, you can attack it. You always know this, the position is fixed. We know if you're dealing with the fifth character, then it relates to the fifth character in the original message. This is the substitution, because the fact that the position is fixed makes it slightly weaker. With the transposition cipher, if you have a block of 100 and you're looking at character number 2, it's related to one of the other characters, the other 98 characters or 99 characters. So it's position-wise, there's no kind of relationship except if you knew the key or the password in the transposition cipher. But in the substitution, you know, second character refers to second character in the plain text message or in the ciphered message. Same with the third character, same with the fourth character. And the last letters of the letter, which are mostly low frequency, tend to stay at the end. The last letters of the letters, which are mostly low frequency, tend to stay at the end. Is that for substitution? That's based on frequency letters. Caesar, examples of substitution ciphers are Caesar, Playfair, no, yeah, and Vigenère ciphers are examples of substitution ciphers. So those three ciphers are substitution ciphers. Those three examples, we've already covered those, but some of them, Caesar is monoalphabetic, the other two are not. In transposition encryption does not replace one symbol by another. It just uses whatever characters inside the message. Again, that's in a way, it's a weakness as well. So sometimes by just looking at the characters, you know what the message might be about in certain cases, you know, but the substitution mixes things up a little bit, you know, because you're putting characters that were not part of the message. So that sometimes increases the complexity. So in transposition, you don't bring anything new. You just change the position, which, you know, it has its own advantages and disadvantages. In transposition encryption, the keys which are closer to the correct key can disclose plain text. So sometimes you use close enough keys, they will not give you the full message, but they will reveal some of the characters. So that's another weakness. Okay, you knew the key, for example, is number 56, but if you use the key 55 or 58, they will not fully, obviously they will not fully release or unwork or decipher the message, but they'll decipher a good part of it. So okay, you won't be able to, and you'll need the exact key to decipher the full message, but by trying close enough keys, some of the characters will start revealing. That's why on its own, maybe it's not powerful enough. Keys are very close to the correct key, and column transposition and examples of the transposition ciphers are column transposition, row transposition, rail fence, that's the diagonal transposition ciphers. These are just some of the examples used. So the newer systems are systems that use a product cipher, they call them. So that's a mixture of both transposition and substitution. And that's what we will be looking at when we look at modern encryption ciphers, modern conventional encryption ciphers. They use both. So what we've looked at now are historic, older systems, but they are the foundation of new systems. But we'll see how do the newer systems work. Now, just a couple of, before computers, some encryption devices were created, especially at the First World War and the Second World War. The Second World War is like a typewriter, like a computer device that was created. It was first created by German scientists, and it was used, by the German maybe army and during the Second World War. So, and then the Allied, the opposition, the opposite forces, like the English, the Americans, then started using their own version after they've discovered, after they tried to break down the code of how that machine worked, and they kind of, the Japanese also produced their own version of a similar machine, a mechanical machine. So it's called the German machine, they called it the Enigma machine. And it implemented a substitution cipher, and it's varying. It wasn't, monoalphabetic. It's used a series of cylinders or gears, and if you put them together in a certain way, in a certain position, they make contacts of certain electric switches or electric circuits, and they kind of generate a certain light or certain characters for encryption and decryption. And they use obviously keys as well. And they actually had, for every alphabet, they had 17,000, a total of 17,576 alphabets. So they used rotary machines that generated that. It looks something like this. We don't really need to, you don't need to know about it, but it's good to see, what was the first implementation really of as close as possible to modern encryption systems. So it's an electric machine that simulated a typewriter. And every time you press one of these keys, it generated a different key. Like you press the letter A, it actually generates another key based on certain things. So what is it based upon? If you look here at the right, you'll see that it has a number of gears. And just by rotating those gears, you get a certain code or a number. And that would be the key used whenever these are in a certain position, those 3 or 4 gears that are there. And by looking at it, it's very simple. The idea is very simple, is that if you rotate those rotors on their sides, on each side of the rotor, there are a number of contact points. So if you make those 2 points contact, or those two, you will form an electric circuit going all the way through the gears and coming back. And it's connected to one of the characters that a light would light up. And if you change one of the gears, rotate it, you'll connect to another lamp. And so based on any position of those rotors, if you change them, you will actually change the electric circuit. So instead of going this way, it might come back to another point here. So the idea is so simple that here's another example of changing. If you change the same characters and you press the letter A, now the letter A is connected to that rotor. On this rotor, it's connected to that one that's connected back to, say, character C. So why does A gave G here and gave C here? Depends on, how you rotate, the position of those rotors. And the position is given by a number. So of course, this rotor now has like a large number, but by putting each one of them has a position that you can read. What number is this one on at? What number is that? So if the receiver also puts the same numbers and type the message they receive, you'll get the opposite, the original characters printing. So it's a very intelligent, very simple idea, and yet just by changing one of the gears, and the gear, you can rotate it so many times as well. You can do that, there's each position. So you select any number here, provided the receiver knows that number. So let's see, we still have the same issue or problem, that the receiver has to have the same key, the same number that you use to position those gears on. And because there's a very large number of those gears, it makes it very difficult. Well, you can still, like in today's terms, by today's computers, you can still break it reasonably fast within seconds. You can try all those different probabilities, which is 17,576 different kind of probabilities. But it's nevertheless, it's an intelligent, very simple, very small, portable device that you can bring with you. Still, it's an electric device and the idea is that has the same keyboard as a printer, but every character you press here, you press A, it gives you a different character, it prints a different character based on the position of those gears. And if you take that and send it, the receiver will also have to have the same position of those gears to reverse, to do the decryption operation. So now, for example, if the receiver prints types G, if the gears are put in the same position and the receiver presses G, it will actually print A. G and A are connected together in this position. But if you change the characters, now the next time if somebody presses C, it will actually give you A. So it's an electric machine. It's very simple. And every gear has lots of points on it, contact points. And just by changing the position, you make the different contacts that will eventually lead to a particular character to be printed or to be lit. So they're known as became known to be the rotor machine. So because these are machines, and depending on what position these three rotors are on, you can, it'll mean which character you press. So if you press, for example, here letter A, and if you follow the circuit for electric A, it'll print a different character. So we don't really need to know. I will not be asking you about Enigma machines here, but this is the actual kind of more detailed kind of breakdown for it. So the gears are changed up and down to reveal a particular keys. The key can be a number, but can be characters, P, F, E. But see the contact points here on the side of each disk here that they will be contacting. So by changing the position, one click, you will change the contact zone. Instead of, the top contact here is touching the top contact, it'll be touching another contact that will cause a different electric circuit. And the key is taken from there. For example, right now, it's probably in the position of the key QGZ. Now that's the password. So if you if you click this gear down a little bit to RGZ, anytime you press a character key, it will give you a completely different key as output or to be ciphered or unciphered. So eventually, you know, multiple variations of those came out, created or generated or manufactured by different countries. So US had one, Britain, Germany, you know, Japan, and they were used in the Second World War. So Second World War, but the Germans were the first to use it. All their messages were actually encrypted, and Britain created an army of experts, and they didn't know it was like a new science at that time, encryption. So they got everybody from every discipline. They got comedians, they got mathematicians, they got, you know, logic people, they got everybody from every kind of, and they said, brought them to a place that, okay, trying to break out how, you know, to break the code. Eventually, mathematicians broke the code, and eventually they knew, they found out what the code is. And eventually they actually got their hands on one of those machines, and they learned how to build it, and they built their own variation of that device. But eventually they did break the code. They knew how it works and what the key is, and they knew, then of course they didn't tell the Germans, and they were listening to all the messages eventually, and they were able to decipher all the messages towards the end of the war. They were able to read all the messages. But then they had their own encryption machine, and they kept on using it. Right. There's something else called steganography, and it's not really encryption, even though it's hiding some message into another message, or some picture into another picture. So this one, in encryption, you change it completely. The message, the original message is not there, and you can only bring it if you have a key to bring it back. With this one, the original message is there, and you just fill in other characters or other shapes into the original one. That makes it kind of vague, not disappear. Like in encryption, your original message completely is not there, either by substitution or by transposition or both. You can never say that you know, if there's a message, just remove this part, or no, you have to do a lot of complex work. Steganography is you have the original message, you fill in other parts. If you remove those extra parts, you'll leave the original message again. As in this picture, for example, you have a picture, you fill it in with some other images or you know, items or colors or whatever, but the original picture is there. And if you remove those extra additions, you'll get your original, recover the original message or the original picture. That's not what we are studying, and that's nothing to do with encryption, even though some people say it is, because you're hiding the original message. Yeah, you're hiding it, but not in an encryption format. You're just mixing it up with something else that if you filter out that extra item, you'd recover the original message. So that just finishes our kind of introduction to our encryption system and historic and all that. So we're gonna open something else, and we're gonna start by kind of slightly more modern encryption systems. So I'm gonna use the matrix now. We look, there's a cipher called Hill cipher. We need to cover that, and Hill cipher is a more mathematically based kind of encryption system. And it's based on matrix operations, mathematically kind of using matrices and specifically matrix operations. And it uses a matrix to encrypt and what's known as the inverse matrix to decrypt. That's an attempt to use mathematics as an encryption system. So we'll be working on that for a little while, and then this today and maybe next week to finish Hill Cipher. So let's quickly go into matrices. That's the simple stuff. Ideally, you should know it, but even if you don't, I'm going to give you the real basic stuff that we need for matrix operation. So we'll spend the next half an hour just talking about simple matrix operations, and then we get into Hill Cipher, how it actually works. So let's get into the mathematics of matrices. So a matrix is defined as an ordered rectangular array of numbers. So any numbers put in rows and columns are known as a matrix, and they can be used to represent systems of linear equations as well, as we will go through now. So, but we'll look at quite a simplistic point of view of a matrix, but the stuff that we will need for the rest of this material. So a matrix is known as a symmetric matrix if you look at the numbers in its rows. Row number 1, it has numbers. They will be the same numbers as row number 1, column number 1. And in row number 2 will have the same values as column number 2. And row number 3 is same as row number 3. So this is known as a symmetric matrix. Generally, the word symmetric, that means both sides, are similar somehow. So yes, in this case, the sides, they mean rows and columns. So rows are the same as columns. So row number 2 is 2, 0, minus 5. Column number 2 is 2, 0, minus 5. So this is known as symmetric matrix. There's another matrix called diagonal matrix. And diagonal matrix is a matrix that has its main diagonal going down from position 1, 1. By the way, every item here in a matrix is a number of items. They could have any number of rows and any number of columns, and every item can be referenced by which row and which column it falls on. So, for example, this item here is on row number 2, column number 3. So rows are numbered 1, 2, 3 from top to bottom. Columns are numbered from 1, 2, 3 from left to right. So every item, its position is specified by always which row and then which column. So the position, say, of this one here, this item here, it sits on row number 2, column 1. And this one would be in row 2, column 2. This would be in row 3, column 1, and so on. So a matrix is a diagonal matrix if it has values other than zeros on its row on this diagonal, and all the other values are zeros. So if all values are zeros except the values on this diagonal, then it's known as a diagonal 0. There are matrices that are known as upper triangular. So an upper triangular matrix is a matrix that this diagonal line, all the numbers above it have any other values other than zeros, and all the ones below it are zeros. So all the values below it are zeros. The one above it may or may not have zeros. This is known as upper triangular. There's also a lower triangular with the opposite, where anything above this line, diagonal line, everything above it is 0, then they'll call that a lower triangular. So if you hear of the term a lower triangular, that means you can imagine the matrix will have numbers along those this diagonal line, and below it and above it are all zeros. A zero matrix is a matrix that has all its values by zeros, or are zeros. The identity matrix is a matrix that has, it's a diagonal matrix that has in its main diagonal, the values are all 1. All the ones above it are 0, and the values below it are 0. This is a very important matrix to remember, the identity matrix. This is like in numerical numbers. The advantage of this matrix, or the feature of this matrix, if you multiply this matrix into any other matrix, the result will be the same. It's like in our numerical system, like number 1. If you multiply 1 into 17, the result will be 17. If you multiply 1 into 10, the result is going to be 10. So it doesn't matter what number it is. So the unit 1, if you multiply it into any other number, the result is always going to be not change. It's the same as the other number. Same as with the identity matrix. If you have two matrices, one is A and one is B, and this is B. So the result, if you say A multiplied into this, it's going to be A. If you have matrix C multiplied into this one, it'll always be, the result will be matrix C. So this is known as the identity matrix. And I've just mentioned here, a matrix is always known by, like it can be defined by, for example, 2 by 3 or 5 by 4 or 6 by 6. It always means how many rows by how many columns is the matrix. So this matrix here, whatever number of rows and whatever number of columns is always defines the matrix. And usually it can be written in, say, this is matrix A, and it's whatever number of rows and columns. And if you want to refer to one item, one element in that matrix, you have to refer to, this is matrix A, I, J, where I is the row and J is the column. So for example, this one here will be A22. That means the item in matrix A in row 2, column 2. Here would be row number M, whatever row number M is, and whatever, this is column number 2, and so on. So every item, first a matrix is known by how many rows and how many columns in it, and every item in that matrix is referred to by the matrix name, by its position in row and column. Matrix additions and subtractions. Two matrices A and B can be added or subtracted only if they have exactly the same dimensions. Like you can only subtract or add those two matrices because they have the same number of rows and the same number of columns. If they have different rows and columns, you cannot add them or subtract them directly. So, and if you need to multiply them, say, and something else, also the result will also have the same rows and columns if you're adding any two matrices or subtracting them. And usually when we say add matrices, that means you add that element or that element to produce that element. So you add the elements separately on individually. So this item here, column 2, row 2, column 2 is 0. Same here, row 2, column 2 is 0. If you add, now that's, let's say this item here, 2 plus 3 equals 5. So the same position is maintained when adding or subtracting. But when you are multiplying a matrix or two matrices, it's a bit more restrictive, that in order to multiply two matrices, they must have the same rows on the second matrix. They must equal the number of columns of the first matrix. So this matrix here has 3 columns. The second matrix must have 3 rows. That's the limitation. You cannot multiply two matrices if the number of columns on the first one are not the same as the number of rows of the second one. And you cannot, and therefore you cannot reverse these. You cannot say B multiplied into A. Now you can multiply A into B because A has 3 columns, excuse me, and B has 3 rows. The first matrix, the number of columns in the first matrix must equal the number of rows in the second matrix. If you bring this one, if you say, okay, I'm going to multiply B into A, B does not only has 1 column, and B has two, sorry, you know, that B has 1 column and A has 2 rows, you cannot multiply them in reverse. Like you cannot, in those 2 matrices, you cannot have B multiplied into A. Only A can be multiplied into B. And the reason is that the number of columns of the first matrix must equal the number of rows of the second matrix. That's a condition multiplying. And when multiplication is done, you don't just multiply the first position, you know, it's not like adding or subtracting where the same position added to the same position element and it will give the same location or position in the result. No, you multiply the full row elements, each individual element, into the same each individual element of the column. And that will give us 1 item. So this item is A11 is multiplied into B1, and A12 is multiplied into B2, and A13 is multiplied into B3, and the result is summed up. So you get the sum of the multiplication of the product of each of those elements to give you 1 item. And the result of a matrix, the resultant matrix that gets formed as a result, will have the same number of rows as the first one, but will have the same number of columns as the second one. So if you multiply this one, which is 2 by 3, into 3 by 1, okay? So this one has 2 rows, 2 by 3 columns, 2 by 3 matrix, into a 3 matrix, 3 by 1. This one has 3 rows and 1 column. The result will have the same number of rows as the first one, so that's 2 by, it will have as many columns as the second one. It will not have this 3 columns like the original one. It will only have 1 column as the second matrix. So the result will just have 1 column here. So all this value here will, this formula here will turn out into 1 single value. Here's an example here. Usually, of course, with this one, the condition applies because the same number, the first matrix has 2 rows, the second matrix has 2 columns. So that's fine, that works. And you multiply the first row in this column to give us that value. The first row again in the second column, that will give us that row. So this is a row number 1 will produce results for row number 1. If you multiply them in this column, that will give us the first column, and that will give us the second column. And then you go down to the second row, that will generate the results in the second row. You multiply it once in the first column, that'll give us that answer. And therefore, so C is multiplying to E and D multiplying to G, and that add them together and then give us that row. You've probably done matrices before, so this stuff is probably so simple to you. I'm just going through it for those who never done matrices. Okay, so, and here's a 3 by 3 matrix. So it's always easier to multiply. Okay, we know there's a condition, the number of rows on the first one must equal the number of columns in the second one. But if they are both equal, they have the same number of rows and columns, then there'll be no issue. And we call this a square matrix. A square matrix has the same number of rows, same number of columns, like those two here. They're 3 by 3 matrix. So this is also 3 by 3. So when you multiply those, so the first element here is based on the first row, the first column. A is multiplying to J, B multiplying to M, C multiplying to P. You add, you get the product of those, or the sum of those. And then first row has to be done with the second column to get that value. First row with the third column, and so on. And then you do the same thing with the second row. You multiply it each time with each one of those columns. So where n by n matrix case, where matrix A has a dimension m by n and matrix B has a dimension n by p, you can multiply them. So provided, Same number of rows equals same number of columns. Hold on. Then the product of A and B is the matrix C, which has a dimension of M and P. So it has the first rows and the rows of the first matrix and the columns of the second matrix. So it's easier to do these things than actually to talk about them. So, so this is another way of stating it. Each element in the resultant matrix is the sum of the multiplication of each of those elements. So this is the way it would be written. But it's easier to do it rather than. So here's an example just to see how it works. So if you're to multiply that matrix A into B first, remember the number of rows, they must equal, the number of columns of the first one must equal the number of rows of the second one. So the result is you multiply the first row into this column. So 2 times 3 is 6, 3 times 4 is 12, 5 times 2 is 10, 1 times 9 is 9, and add them up, and that give us 37. That's the first element. And the same row, the second row, multiply it into the first row, column here. There it is. 4 times 3 is 12, 6 times 4, 24, 0 times 2 is 0, and 7 times 9 is 63. You add them up and 99. So the resultant matrix, as you can see, has the same rows as the first matrix and the same number of columns as the second matrix. So it's 2 by 1 matrix. So this one is 2 by 4. This is 4 by 1. They produce 2 by 1. So this one has the same number. So this is what's written actually on this screen that we went through before. So the resultant matrix will have these two here, they must be the same in the n. So the first matrix, m by n, that's number of rows by columns. So if the columns is n, the second matrix has to have the same number of rows. So that's the condition. Number of columns of the first equal number of rows of the second. And they'll generate, and there it is. The number of rows of the first, number of columns of the first one is 4, equal the same number of rows of the second. And the resultant will have the same rows as the first, same number of columns as the second. That's basic stuff. You should know it. You should also know and remember in matrix multiplication is that A multiplied into B does not equal B multiplied into A. So if you change the position of the matrices, even if they were square matrices, the values will, the results will be different, the outcome. But remember also, a matrix that has 2 rows and 3 columns can be multiplied into a matrix that has 3 rows and 2 columns. And they will generate the same rows as the first one, same columns as the second one. That's the result. But if you reverse them, it like, okay, and 3, with this one here, 3 rows by 2 column matrix can be multiplied into 2 columns by 3 matrix, and that will give us a completely different matrix by reversing, even if they're the same matrices. But this one, the result will be 3 rows and 3 columns. 3 rows is the first one, 3 columns is the second one. So if you change A and B and change it, and instead of multiplying A into B, you'll get some matrix. If you change them, you could completely get not just different results, sometimes different dimension matrix as well. So let's do then something else. Let's have an example of multiplying this matrix into this matrix. Usually the condition is again the same. The first one has, if it has 3 rows, the second one must have the same number of columns. So this one has 3 columns, so that's fine. Once you can see this one has the same number of rows as this number of columns here, then we can do a successful multiplication. Now, if you go through the normal multiplication here, so if you multiply this number into its equivalent number in this column, so usually we multiply this row into the first column to get the first position. So 5 times 1, 2 times 0, and 4 times 0, and we add them together. So obviously the 2 times 0 and 4 times 0 are nothing, you know, zeros, and it's only 5 times 1. So the result here will be 5 somewhere here, right? And then we do the same row into the second column, and the 5 goes with the 0. The 2 goes with, well, 2 times 1 is 2, and the 4 with 0 is 0. So in fact, the second number is going to be 2, and the third number is going to be 4. And in fact, when you multiply this into that, you're going to have exactly the same matrix result. If we go through it, you'll find that's going to be the same. Why? Because this is known as the identity matrix I talked about earlier on. This is the identity matrix. Any matrix, you must apply this into the identity matrix. How do you identify the identity matrix? It has the value 1 along this diagonal line and zeros above it and below it. That's known as the identity matrix. And so the identity matrix is important because it has the ability that if you multiply it into other matrix, the result is going to be the same as the other matrix. So A times I referring to the identity matrix, the result equals A. Okay, and this just shows that A times B, if you have two matrices, A and B, and this is the value for them, if you multiply A into B, doesn't necessarily mean B into A. Or if A multiplied into B equals 0, it doesn't mean that A is 0 or B is 0. Like in numbering system, if we multiply 5 times 0, the result is 0. So if you get a 0, then you assume it's the first of the one of the two numbers is 0, but not necessarily. Here's an example. Non-zero matrices. Here's a matrix with these values and B with that values. If you multiply those, so 2 times 1 is 2. And 1 times 4 is 4. There it is. So 2 times 1 is 2. 1 times 4 is 4. And minus 3 times 2 is minus 6. If you add this 2 plus 4 is 6. Minus 6 is 0. And then if you get the next element, this element here, so this row times this column, 2 times 9 is 18, plus 1 times minus 6, 1 times minus 6 is minus 6, and minus 3 times 4 is 12, minus 12. So it's 18 minus 6 minus 12, that's a 0 again. So as you can see, this matrix is not a 0 matrix, A. B is not a 0 matrix. And yet, if you multiply A into B, you'll get a 0 matrix. So if A times B is 0, that's the point here. If multiplying matrix A into matrix B, we get a 0 matrix. It does not necessarily mean A is a 0, and B doesn't necessarily mean it's a 0. Of course, if they are zeros, the result will be 0. But don't take it for granted that A is a 0 matrix or B is a 0 matrix. Something else we'll need to do or to use is something called the scalar multiplication. A matrix can be scaled up or down, the numbers in a matrix, by a number. So, or a matrix can be broken down, analyzed into smaller matrix with a scalar. Scalar is the one that changes the scale or the size of the matrix. So you can actually, if you had this matrix without the 4 here multiplication, this matrix, if you want to increase the value of this matrix by 4 or 3 or any number, so then all we have to do is multiply that number into this. It's like you know, if you open brackets in mathematics and you have a number 4 multiplied into every element in the bracket, it's pretty much the same. So a scalar can be multiplied into other, or a matrix can be multiplied into any value scalar. It could be 0.5, like a half or a quarter, or 1 or 2 or 3 or 4. So multiplying into 4, you have to multiply it into every element of the matrix. So this small matrix with its scalar equal this matrix. So 4 times 3 is 12, 4 times 8, 4 times 2 is 8, 4 times 5 is 20, and so on. So every element is multiplied into a scalar. Remember, this is different from multiplying one matrix into a second matrix. A scalar is just one value that it changes every other value, every other element in the matrix. That turns it into, it's called scalar multiplication. And that can increase these numbers or decrease them based on the scalar. So if you put the scalar to half, then every element here is going to be split into half. And you can actually, that's one way to manipulate matrices, is by, you say, okay, if we start with the opposite way, if we start with this matrix, and we say this matrix can be actually reduced to this matrix in the opposite direction with the scalar. So these are the same, pretty much the same elements mathematically anyway. So here's the opposite, where you have a matrix and you can reduce its size, say, by 5. You can say this matrix 10, 25, 45, 35, all that is same as this matrix 2, 5, 9, 7, 3, 10, but each element is multiplied into 5. So they are equal matrices or equal values now. This matrix on the left and this scalar with this matrix on the right. Transposing a matrix. So scaling is one operation. Let's transpose a matrix. Transposing a matrix is exchanging the rows for columns. So the matrix A, every item matrix A, it's transposed into AJI. That should be where I is the row and J is the column. So there's actually an error in this one. It should be AJI, this one. So every item, let's say this 2 here, falls into row number 1, column number 2. We change it, instead row 1, column 2, we make it row 2, column 1. So the 2 is changed into row 2, column 1. So this row 5, 2, 3 becomes a column 5, 2, 3. This row 4, 7, 1 becomes column number 4, 7, 1. Row 3, 8, 5, 9 becomes column 3, 8, 5, 9. In fact, it's done by changing every single element, but you can do it for a full row and it will work. Okay, this is called transposing a matrix. So if you're asked to transpose a matrix, this is transposing a matrix. A square matrix is a matrix that has same number of rows and now same number of columns, 2 by 2. In the case of a square matrix, M and N, the transpose can be used to check if the matrix is symmetric. A symmetric matrix is a matrix that has, we mentioned earlier on, same row, the same column. So in this matrix here, matrix A has column 1, 2, row 1, 2. It's also, its column is 1, 2. Second row is 2, 3. Its second column is 2, 3. So they call this symmetric matrix. I mentioned symmetric matrix earlier on. This is also a square matrix. So this is a square matrix and a symmetric matrix. If you want to know, is this symmetric? I'll transpose it, replace its columns by its rows. It'll find that it did not change. It's the same. Okay, so there's a lot of talk. It's all simple, but I just need you to know all this stuff. Okay, and the reason we're going through this is that we needed to find something important is that's used in matrix encryption. So in matrix encryption, generally, to encrypt a message, you take the message, you put it into a matrix. The characters, we change them into numbers, put them in a matrix, and we use a matrix to encrypt it. So you multiply one matrix into our message, it will generate another matrix that can be transferred into a ciphered message. Now, to bring it back, you need to take that ciphered message, multiply it into another matrix to bring it back. That other matrix is known as the inverse matrix. So it's like in our numbering system, if I say multiply, let's say here's a number 10, I want to encrypt it, multiply it into 5. 10 times 5 is 50, so that's encrypted as 50. Now, how do I bring 10 back from the number 50? I have to multiply it into the number 1 over 5. And that will bring back the 10. So what's the relationship between 5 that I used to encrypt? 10 times 5, I got 50, and I had to multiply 50 into 1 over 5. What's the relationship between 5 and 1 over 5? You'll find that they are the inverse of one another. The inverse. So 5 and 1 over 5, you multiply them together, you get 1. So that's the idea in matrices. So in numbering system, every number in our numbering system, number 7, what's the inverse of 7? Is what's the number that you multiply it into 7, will get you 1. So 1 over 7 normally. Every 7, the 7 has 1 over 7. Multiply them together, you get the unit matrix. 50, what's the inverse of 50? 1 over 50. So in matrices as well, if you multiply any, say, number in a matrix or any message in a matrix, you get you the inverse. You get you some ciphered number or message. If you want to bring it back, you multiply it into the inverse of that matrix, it will bring it back. So now, our first step in this is try to find out the inverse of a matrix. And we look at 2 or 3 ways of doing the inverse matrix, and you need to know at least one of them. So we'll see how it goes. So now I'm leading to one of those techniques. Some people find it real easy, some people find it real difficult. So we look at least 2 techniques of finding out the inverse of a matrix. So with a matrix, first thing we need to do, just so you have the overall plan. You have a matrix, we say use it to encrypt a message. We encrypt it. Then to decrypt it, you need to know the inverse of that matrix. Well, you need to know the matrix as the key, but before you can decipher your message, we need to get the inverse of that matrix and use it to decrypt the message. So this is still a conventional encryption system but now we use a matrix as that's the key matrix. The user uses the matrix and to encrypt the message. The key matrix is sent to the receiver, or the receiver also has that matrix, but to decipher the message, they need to first generate the inverse of that matrix and to get the deciphering matrix. So it's like we have 2 matrices, but they are kind of strongly related. One is the inverse of the other. If you knew one, you can work out what the inverse. So you use the matrix to encrypt and the inverse of the matrix to decrypt. That's as the keys for encrypting and decrypting. Now, in order to generate the inverse of a matrix, there are 2 techniques, so we'll use one of the techniques. And one of the techniques is known as, is by doing a number of transformations to a matrix and slowly transform it into the inverse of a matrix. And the transformations will require 3 operations in order to be able to convert a matrix into its inverse matrix. If you've done this before, that's great. If you can do this now and learn it and find it easy, great. If you find it difficult, we look at the second method or technique that some people find it easier. Either way, you should be able to learn one of them at least to find out the inverse of a matrix. So after this kind of simple introduction now to matrices, let's see how can we create the inverse. So to create the inverse, you need to remember or know those three operations. This is one way of doing it. So let's see how it works. Looking at this matrix, first, let's learn something called row change, or changing the rows of a matrix. And this operation simply involves the interchange of two rows. So for example, looking at this matrix, we say, right, if this is row number 1, row number 2, row number 3, can we change the first two rows? Like take all this row, number 1, make it number 2, and number 2, make it number 1. And there it is, and this is called row change. So on the rows, we can do a change. So if we say a change, you can change any two rows you want, as long as you change a row, not an element on a row. You can take row number 1, change it with row number 3, change their positions. We can work out eventually the inverse of the matrix by being able to do that. Remember, what we try and do, we're trying, in a way, for now, we try to reach the unit matrix. This is the unit matrix. If somehow we can use the unit matrix, there's a way that we can find out what the inverse of the original matrix we started with. But for now, just if I ask you to do a row change, well then just remember it's just a matter of saying which row with which two rows we will exchange. Right. The other operation is called the multi. But that's the multiply. It's often necessary and or desirable and or convenient to multiply each element of a given row of a matrix by a non-zero scalar. So this is also another way of another technique. So we're going to have maybe 3 of those. Just if we keep doing them to a matrix, we might be able to find out its inverse, either exchange rows or just pick one row and multiply the elements into some number. For example, here's an example. Remember, we're always trying to reach the unit matrix. So this matrix here is almost a unit matrix. All we have to do is change this number. If we can change this number into 1 without changing the other numbers in this row, then that's the unit matrix. How can we do it? That's if we use the multiply process. The multiply process, that means, remember, all these processes now we've talked about the exchange, the multiply, they're done on rows, not on columns, on rows. So if we can think of something that we can multiply a value into each element here, and we'll get 1, 0, 0. That's what we want. Is there? And yeah, you can say here, if we multiply this number, multiply the first row of the first matrix by 2, 3. So we have the number 3 over 2. So if we multiply this into 2 over 3, we'll have 6 over 6, and that will be great. That will be 1. And if you multiply 0 into 2, 3 will be 0. And if we multiply the third element into 0, and there, voila, we have the actual, key matrix or identity matrix. So this is what we mean by the multiply. You pick a value, a number that you can say, I'm going to multiply that number into every element of row 1 or row 2, row 3, but it has to be on a full row. So if you pick one of them, for example, if we had this element here in row number 2 and this one there, we say, first thing we say, can we change those 2 rows? We put it in this position. Now we say, okay, can we multiply all elements in row number 1 into the number 2 over 3, and that would convert this into 1, and they'll convert those into zeros. They're already 0, so anything you multiply into 0 is 0, and that we reach the identity element. So that's what I mean by the multi operation. So if I say change operation, that means change any two rows. You need to know, or you can pick any two rows and change them. Anyway, to lead you to this, ultimately, we want to reach the identity matrix. Okay, so if you can change any rows you like, as long as you can reach, and that will help us. And we'll see how it will later help us into reaching the identity. Do not multiply a row of a matrix by 0. You're not allowed to multiply into 0. And in some such operations, the counter product to other, it can cause a lot of grief. No, okay, just let's go. The next operation, so we just remember now the two operations, change, multiply. This, you can also do an add. And this is an expansion of multiply. It involves an application of multi to a given row, and it is followed by adding the result produced by multi to another row. So what that means is you can say, multiply this number into a value and add it to this row. Multiply every element here, multiply it into a number. It could be 1 and add it to that one. You can just say, listen, row number 2 will equal row number 2 plus row number 1. So you use, or vice versa. You can say row number 1 will equal row number this one plus that. For example, looking at this, ideally, this is almost the identity matrix. All we have to do is get rid of this number here. How can we get rid of this number? Well, you cannot do an operation just one element. You have to do it on every element. So by looking at this row underneath it, you say, woo, if we can multiply every element here into 2 and add it to the top value. Okay, so if we take this row, do a multi on it, don't change the values. This is now we're going to be doing add. Add is adding one row to another row. You don't change the original row. You know, let's say we want to add the value in row number 2. We want to add it to row number 1. We change row number 1. We don't change row number 2. But so you can also change or add row number 2 twice or 3 times row number 2 to row number 1. So that's why when we say multiply and add. So add usually take one element, one row, complete row. Let's say row number 3. You can say I'm going to add every element in row number 3 to row number 1. Or we can add twice the value of every element in row number 2 to row number 3, or 3 or 5 or whatever number. So you can actually assume always, even when you say I'm adding just one value, you know, the row of row number 3 or to number 1, if it's the same value, you don't want to multiply them into anything, just say it's multiplied into 1. So either multiply into 1 and add it, or multiply into 2 or half or whatever you want. But the basic idea is adding. Add the value of one of any row, add it to the other row. But as well as adding, you can add the same values or half of them or twice or 4 times. So you can also include a multiply in it. So in this example, it'll be great if we can get rid of this -2. How do we get rid of it? If we can add +2 to it. Well, look at any of the other elements. There's 1 here. If we can multiply this into 2 and add it to the one above, then we'll get rid of that. So here's the idea. Let's take this row, multiply every element into it into 2 and add them to the top element. So 2 times 0 is 0. Add them to 1, nothing changes. 2 times 1 is 2. Add them to -2, it's 0. And we got rid of that. And 2 times 0 is 0. Add them to 0, it'll be changed. And there we are. We got the unit matrix again. Okay, so just remember the operation. Change. You can change any row with another row. Bring all the values from one row, exchange them. No change of values except change in the position. The other one we done before this one. It's called multi. Multiply any, or pick one row, multiply every element into it into half or 2 or 5 into some scalar, any scalar. And now add one element, one rows, one, you pick every element in a row and add them to another element and put the result into the other element. You don't change the original row you took from. And while adding, you can add it once or twice or 3 times. So you can use a scalar. So the scalar can be multiplied into the element and then added to another row. Finally, this is the last one. So we have change, we have multi, and we have add. So this is the last one. It's called pivoting. So these are, we've already looked now at 3 operations. This is the 4th and last operation. Pivoting, it's called pivoting. It's a combination of multi and add. Multi is used on one row and then add the value to another row. The multipliers by multi and add are chosen so that the resulting operation produces an elementary column. That's a column with zeros with and 1 maybe. Remember, the ultimate, you're trying to reach the unit matrix. The location of the 1 in the matrix is in the position of the pivot. So the pivot is the point you don't want to change really, ideally. So if we want to transform, for example, the first into the second matrix, we're going to change this matrix into this matrix. Right. I don't know the best way to do it, but for example, all I could say, for example, we want to turn this into a 0 or we want to turn this into 1 or something along those lines. So there isn't one way you can change this into that in maybe 100 different ways. It doesn't matter as long as you follow those rules and eventually you reach the same conclusion. But let's get back to the pivot. So one way to do this is to pivot on the entry 4. So pivoting, just pivot is like multiply and add more than one row. We did it earlier on. Multi and add is one, on one row. Now the pivot is, you can, let's say we're going to pivot on this number 4. The first, apply multi to the second row using 1/4. So first thing, let's get rid of this 4. So you multiply, we do a multiply. So multiply, how do you get rid of this 4? Turn it into 1. Multiply every element here into 1/4. So 1/4 into 0 is 0. 1/4 into 4 is 1. That's 1/4 multiplied into 4. The result is 1. And 0 into 1/4 is 0. So we've done a multi on row number 2. We got rid of the 4. Now, 2 more operations. First, multiply the second row by -3 and add it to the top one. So we are really pivoting, concentrating on this number here, on this row, second row. So now we want to turn this into a 0. If we multiply this into 3 and add it to the top one, or -3, it's -3 times 0 is 0, added to 1 doesn't change. But now -3 times 1 is -3, added to 3 turns it into a 0. We finished with that. Now we do the same with the bottom row. Oh. Rami, Raseli, how do you get rid of this -2 here? Are you there?
Yeah, I'm there.
Are you following me, or do you have any suggestion? How do we get rid of this -2? Anybody? Sorry. Akil, Verghese? I want to get rid of this -2. What operation do you suggest?
Addition. I'm thinking adding the first row with the.
Okay, let me give you a hint. Use the second row. Anybody else?
Multiply the second row by 2 and then add to the third row.
To the third row. So if we multiply every element here into 2 and add them to the elements here. So 2 times 0 is 0 added to 0. It doesn't change. 2 times 1 is 2 added to -2. It turned this into a 0. And that's what we want to do. And 2 times 0 is 0 added to 1 doesn't change. So that's what's actually, how do we, that's one way of getting rid of it. It's by no means it's the only way, but that's probably the quickest way now. And there it is. So if you have anything that looks like this and you want to get rid of one number here, see, okay, if the others are zeros, you can always say, listen, anything I multiply into 0 is going to be 0. If I add it to this one, it doesn't going to change. Those two will not change. But if I multiply this into 2, 2 times 1 is 2, and add it to -2, then it will turn this into a 0. And that's what happens here, and that's it. So multiply the second row by 2, you pick a value, multiply every element here. But see, you can, if you do it to one element, you must do it to all other elements. You cannot just do it to one element in the row. That's why they call these row operations. Either change one row by one row, every element you move that row, put it in another place, or multiply, get one row and multiply its values, increase them or decrease them, but every element, and then adding one row, every element in one row to another row, or multiply and add, multiple add. So you multiply every element in one of the rows, you pick one of the rows, multiply one of the elements. Some people pick this like that. Some people, doesn't make sense to them. Don't worry, we have another technique. It suits me as well. I actually don't like this technique, but it's easy enough, you know. So to some people they love it, so that's fine. Oh, so there's another way to calculate the inverse, and we'll work it out as well. So, and that's using something called the determinant of a matrix. So there's another way to calculate the inverse of a matrix. And but to do it, you need to know what the determinant is. And a determinant of a matrix is a number associated with a matrix that if it's used and multiplied into the matrix, we'll end up getting the inverse eventually. So another way to calculate the inverse is to find out the determinant. So I'm going to show you how to get
Professor?
Yes, sir.
Before we start this, could we have a break, please?
Yeah, it's due. We're due a break. Yeah, thank you very much for reminding me. Good. Okay. And how long is the break?
It's usually 30 minutes.
Okay. Is everybody okay to have a break? We were actually due at 11, right? Thank you for reminding me. Okay, and this is a good time to break before start another topic. Okay, I'll see you in 30 minutes, guys. It's 11:15. I'll see you at 11:45.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Take care. We're back. Okay, let's work out the something else we need to work out, guys. We got to the point where we learned those 4 operations that will be required to actually calculate the inverse of a matrix. That's changing one row for another, adding one value to another, a value to all the elements in a row, or multiply, increasing or changing the value by multiplying, scaling one of the values in a row, or multiply and add. And we also check the pivot one where you center your operation around one element. All these will be required later on to find out the inverse of a matrix. But let's go now. There's another technique to find out the inverse of a matrix, and that's by finding something that's known as the determinant of a matrix. So there is a value for every matrix known as the determinant, and it plays an important role in finding the inverse. So we're going to look at, again, 2 ways to find the determinant of a matrix. So can you hear me? Can one of the students say yes or?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, good. So we are there. Okay. Come on, quick slideshow, go back. Right, so let's, I'll go a little bit quicker because the stuff is so easy to do rather than talk about it. It takes longer to talk about it rather than implement it. So the inverse of a matrix. The inverse of a matrix is the easiest way to do it in 2x2 matrix. The bigger it gets, the more complicated, the more difficult it gets. But for the easiest in 2x2 matrix is you multiply those 2 elements and those 2 elements. So that's these 2 elements, they are in this row here, and those 2 elements, and subtract or get the difference between them. So the determinant for this matrix is 3 times 2 minus 5 times 7. And if these had signs, take them into consideration, use them. If this was minus 7, it will be 5 times minus 7, and the value will be minus 35, and it will change the value. So it's 3 times 2 is 6 minus 35, and the determinant is minus 29. So now that determinant can be used easily to generate the inverse. So remember, the ultimate aim is we want to generate the inverse of a matrix. And there are 2 ways to do it, either using the previous technique that we talked about, moving, copying, adding, the row operations, or using the determinant. So that's one way. That's another technique. Some people prefer this technique. Okay, but calculating the determinant isn't always as easy. So if the matrix is bigger than 2x2, if it's 3x3 matrix, then how do you actually calculate the determinant? Is that by going through one of the rows, picking one of the rows and selecting the elements. Let's say we pick the top row and take one of the rows one at a time. Let's say take A11. So we're going to be selecting the elements of this row. This is how to calculate the determinant. If we select the top row, then we have to get the following numbers. So we start with A11. Imagine if A11, that it's a cross between this row and this column. So if you hide this row and this column, and you're left with this matrix. So it's like saying A11 multiplied by this little matrix. Okay. And then you start with the plus sign, minus sign, plus. If this is any bigger, you go plus, minus, plus, and you keep changing. Minus the next element, which is this one, A12. A12, it goes like this on the element and the row. So hide this row again. A12 is on this row and this column. So hide this row and this column, and you're left with those two elements and those two elements. So it's A12, that's the value that's sitting there. That's row number 1, column number 2, multiplied into this matrix. Those two elements, 2, 1, 3, 1, here they are, and 2, 3, 3, 3, and here it is. So multiplying that element by that, multiplying that element, and then we do the same with the third value. So that hides this row and this column, and that leaves us with this matrix. So you multiply that value into this matrix, and you keep changing the sign from plus sign to minus sign to plus, minus, and so on. So let's do an example. So if you're asked, what is the determinant for this matrix? Right, this is not 2 by 2 matrix, it's bigger, 3 by 3. So let's take, for example, the top row, the value 1 multiplied into which matrix? You hide that row, all the values here and all the values in the first column. And that leaves us with this matrix, 5, 7, 4, 8. There it is, 5, 7, 4, 8. That's a plus. Minus, we take the next number, which is 3. So minus 3 multiplied into what matrix? You hide 3 is on this row and in this column. So you hide this row and this column. That leaves us with 4, 7, 2, 8. There it is. And then the next number is 2. So plus 2 multiplied into, and 2 is, you hide that row and that column. That leaves us with 4, 5, 2, 4. So 4, 5, 2, 4. Now, let's write it down. So what's the determinant for this matrix now, for this 2 by 2? We've already done 2 by 2. You multiply those 2 minus the product of those two. So 5 times 8 minus 4 times 7. And there it is, 5 times 8 minus 4 times 7. Minus 3 multiplied into the matrix or determinant of this matrix, which is 4 times 8 minus 2 times 7. That's 32 minus 28, plus 2 into the determinant, which is 4 by 4 minus 2 times 5. And if you add these, 5 times 8 is 40 minus 28. So 40 minus 28 is 12 multiplied into 1, that's 12. The next value is 3 times 4, 8 minus 27. 4, 8 is 32 minus 28, that's 18 multiplied into 3 in minus 3 times 18 is minus 54 plus 12. And if you add these or sum these, you'll get the determinant is minus 30. We also need this determinant to work out what's the inverse of this matrix. Okay. So this is the general rule for it, how to do it, depending on how big the matrix is. I'll give you another example to do. So I'll leave this for an example to do it later on. So let me go to another technique. There's another technique, and you can pick whichever one you feel is easier. If you have, for example, 3 by 3 or 4 by 4 or 6 by 6 matrix, this is another way to do it. So I know you could have done it now. You could do it by saying, okay, it's 3 by 3, where let's take this number, multiply into this matrix, that number, multiply into this other matrix. The technique we just done. There's another technique. It says, if, for example, you have 3 by 3, then add more columns here. Just repeat a number of columns here. So you take the first column and the second column and repeat them. Just write them again. 1, 0, 0, 2 minus 4, and 3. So this column 1 and 2, you repeat them again. Okay, so that's one way to do it. So if it's 5 by 5, then you only leave the last column. You just repeat as many columns. Normally, we will not go beyond 4 by 4, but well, even 3 by 3 is probably good enough. So basically, you take this column, create another, extend the matrix, make it bigger, and this one, and put it there. Now, draw this line. See these diagonal lines. You have 3 numbers here, 3 numbers, 3 numbers. Usually, if you multiply each one of them, and add them together and multiply those diagonals as well. And usually we'll subtract them. Okay, so extend the determinant grid first and calculate the numbers. So we've extended it. We've formed the diagonal calculation of the numbers. So this one here is 1 times -4, 1 times -1. So 1, that's +4. And this one is 2 times 1 times 0 is 0. And that's 3 times 0 is 0 times 3 is 0, another 0. And you add them together. Multiply along the diagonal lines. And multiply also in the opposite diagonals. You know, you go diagonally downward from the top and diagonally upward. And hold on. And then you add the down and subtract the upward. So these values, you add them, you say whatever this one is, 4 plus 0 plus 0 minus 0 here, that's 0 times -3 times -4 times 3, that's a 0. 3 times 1 times 1 is 3. And this one is a 0. So it basically just ends up at 4 minus 0. So these, and add them up. Each one of them has a plus sign in front of it, the product. And these, at the end of each one of them, have a minus sign. And there it is. So this one is 1 times 4 minus 4 is -4 times -1 is 4. This one here is a 0. 2 times 1 times 0. 3 times 0 times 3 is 0. These are with plus signs. And then you go to the opposite ones. 4 times -0, that's 0. But it's with a -0. 3 times 1 is 3 with a minus. And this is with the minus. So these have the plus values. And these have the minus value. So if they end up with a minus and you add a minus to it, they turn into a plus. So just that you must add a minus sign. The value could be 3, could be -3. If it's -3, then this minus will turn into a plus. And then if you add them, +4 plus 0 plus -3, that's 1. And the determinant is 1. I personally find this one is the easiest, but to find the determinant. But the other way as well will work. So whichever one you feel is the easiest. Okay, so anytime you're given a matrix, you add as many columns, one less than the matrix, do downward diagonals and upward diagonals. The downward have a plus sign in front of them, the upward minus sign, and find out and just get the sum. So the determinant of matrix A in this case is 1. So maybe this is a good time to stop and ask you to have an example, of either technique, using either of the techniques we used. So now we've used did we use 3 techniques? Yeah, no. Okay, so let's, I don't know, whichever way is easier. Maybe we do both. We try and work out what the determinant for this matrix using either technique. Okay, do you want to try it, guys? Do you want to have a quick go, like 2 minutes, try and work out what the value is? Just to make sure we are all right on that. Yeah, why not? Let's do that. Okay, guys, have 2 minutes, use either of the techniques. Remember, no, let me give you maybe a simpler example. Hold on. Let me go for an easier example. Okay, let's go for 2 by 2 matrix. Just take this matrix. Just take this matrix 5 minus 2, 0, 3. 2 by 2 matrix. Not this particular matrix. What I'd like, just try a simpler example. The simpler example is this, guys. No. don't have the actual code now for that. But what I'm going to do is just have this. 5 minus 2, 0. Three. Can you work out, please, guys, the inverse for the determinant for this matrix, 2 by 2 matrix? It's a lot easier and simpler. Go on, have a quick go at it, please. 2 minutes to work out the value for this matrix. Where are the square brackets in this one? Yeah. No. Go on, here's the matrix in front of you guys. So go ahead and try and work out the determinant for this matrix. So quick and easy to do, but just want to see that you can do it. 5 minus 2, 0, 2. What's the determinant for that matrix?
Minus 12.
Okay, well, I haven't checked it, but I just want everybody to try it just for a quick right bracket. Oh, there it is. Okay, so. All right. So there are two ways to do it. Just one way is to multiply 5 times 2 minus 2 times 0. What did you get? Who was that student who said you got minus 2 or something? So the determinant is multiply, because if it's 2 by 2, just multiply this diagonal numbers minus the product of those two numbers. So 5 times 2 minus 0 times minus 2, and that gives us 10. How did you get minus? Did somebody say they got a different?
I wrote down minus on the under part and on the up part. That's why I wrote the wrong.
Okay. So right. Okay. So guys, one way to do this is to say it's 5 times 2 in one bracket, and minus it's 0 times minus 2. Obviously, it's a 0, so it's 5. That's the result of that. So the determinant of A equals 10 in this particular example. Now that's doing it this way. Of course, there's another technique where it says use the other way, add another column to it, but it's making it a bit more complex. If it's 2 by 2, this is the easiest way to do it. Now, let's say here's another example of 3 by 3. To do this 3 by 3, excuse me. Okay, so in this particular example, thank you. We can do it either in 2 ways. We can say, right, to actually do the original one. Where is it? Say this one here. To do this, the determinant for this matrix, we can do the 5 and then determinant for this matrix, minus 2 and determinant for this matrix. This is the first technique we've done. Or let's add those 2 columns, 5, 0, 2 beside it, and minus 2, 3, 0. And now we have this column plus those numbers columns, and thus this column. So multiply 5 times 3 times 7 plus minus 2 multiplying to minus 1 multiplying to 2 plus 1 times 0 times 0. And then the multiplication of those 2, 3, and 1 minus this one, 0, minus 1, and 5, and that. And that's, I'll just go through it because it's quicker. It's easy to do. So first we extend the matrix by 2 more columns, and then we take those diagonal values with a plus sign. We take those product, that's 2 times 3 times 1 minus with the minus, and then minus Again, 0 times 5 times 1, which is this one here. So this value here is 5 times 3 times 7 is 5 times 3 is what? 15 times 7 is 105. Minus 2 times minus 1 is plus 2 times 2 is 4. And 1 times 0, 0 is 0. And the other numbers in red going upward this way, they're in minus. So 2 times 3 is 6, times 1 is 6 in minus. And 0 times 1 times 5 is 0 in minus. And 7 times 0 times minus 2 is 0. So it's, you add all these two numbers, 109 minus 6, that's 103 is the determinant for this matrix. So that's probably a good way of doing it. Now, let's go and try. We didn't try the other technique. Where is it? Is it there? Is there an example for the other technique? Actually, using those. Okay. Oh, that's for the scalar technique will actually create the inverse directly. So that's what we'll do next. Okay, so let's go now, continue. So now we found two ways to do the actual determinant. Now we want to do the actual, calculate the actual inverse of a matrix. Sorry, I went back up there. Now, let's do the inverse. So ultimately, that's what we want to do. In order to encrypt and decrypt using the matrix techniques, you need to find out the actual inverse of a matrix. Now, there are two ways, again, to find the inverse of a matrix. Doing the exchange of rows, the first technique we've done, or using the determinant. So if you knew the determinant, it would be easy enough to generate the inverse. Or you can use those 4 row operations we talked about earlier on to generate the inverse. Either technique can be used to generate the inverse. We'll go through the two of them. So let's first try the exchanging row exchange operation. So how do we actually create the inverse? Using the exchange identities. That's the row operations. Remember, we looked at those row operations. There are 4 row operations. We can implement them to generate the inverse. So how do we actually do it? Okay, they say first to create the inverse of a matrix, take the matrix. Let's say we want to create this matrix and put beside it in the same dimension as this matrix, put the ID matrix. So extend it, expand it by as many columns as the original one has, but use the identity matrix. The identity matrix is 1, 1, 1 with zeros on either side. So that's your first step. Now we should try and do all the row operations that we've learned earlier, or any combination of them, or any one of them, or whichever, any number, it doesn't matter. With the aim is to turn this side of this now combined matrix into identity matrix. Of course, as you keep changing, remember the row operation is operations done on the entire row, all the row for all the values. So if you multiply this into 1 or 2, then you multiply every element. If you add that row to this row, you have to add that to that, that to that, but also these will be added. So while we are working on this, you try to make this side identity matrix. You try to make the side 1, 1, 1, and the rest of values are zeros. Whatever you're left with here on this side is going to be your inverse matrix. Okay, so the inverse matrix is going to be on this side after the exchange operations that we're going to do. So, okay, let's just talk about it briefly, and then let's see how it's actually done. So if you look at this matrix, you see 1, 1. Ideally, we want to turn this value into 1 if we can, right? And then we try and, if we turn this 4 into 1, there'll be some value here. We'll try and turn this into a 0 as well. And if these two can turn into a 0, then whatever we do in order to achieve that, and of course we want that as 0 as well, and that as 0 as well. So while we're doing this, so we'll probably need to do 10 or 12 or 15 operations in order to achieve, to make this looks like that. 1, 1, 1, and zeros everywhere else. But while we're changing this, this will also change. And whatever is we're left with here is going to be our inverse matrix. And that's what we want to do. So if we use this for encryption, we'll be using the product here that we'll get for decryption, and vice versa. Okay, so just, you know, plainly or briefly, anybody knows how to get rid of this 5, for example? If you say, for example, if we say multiply every element here into 5 or -5 and add it to this one. Okay, so we can multiply this into 5 and add it to this one. This becomes, if we multiply this into -5 and add it to that one, this will go into 4. And if we multiply this into -5, it becomes -5, add it to 5, it becomes 0. So we turn that to 0. But you turn this as 0, and that's changed. Ideally, we don't want that to change either. So as you can see, this is where the tricks with this, you keep trying until you eventually achieve it. So it's always good to have, say, start with a 0 here. So if we multiply this into anything and add it to this one, it will not change. But this will change if we add it to that one there. So for example, but here, in this case here, we don't want this to change. And we want this 7 to be reduced, turned it to a 0. Or sometimes say, hey, that row is in the wrong place. If we move it up there, bring that one down here, we'd be able to work on that much easier. So you could also change. So that's where everybody has their own way of doing it. And there's so many ways to do it. And eventually some of them are going to be shorter than others. But let's see. Ultimately, we want to reach here 1, 1, 1, and these values are zeros. It's always good to start with the value, with the row that has a 0 in it and a 1. So remember, with the 0, if you multiply any number here, let's say you want to get rid of this 7, for example. I don't know what's the best way to do it, but you can, for example, say, right, multiply everything here into 2 or -2 and add it to this row. So yeah, you add this, multiply this into 2, it's 8, or -8. I multiply into -2, add it to this one, and this will turn into -1. While this one does not change. Multiply this into 2, -2. -2 times 0 is 0. Add it to this one will not change. Okay. Even though that may not be what we want to do at this stage. We ideally, we'd like to turn this into a 0 as well. So let's see how this was done, how this is done. So let's go and follow this process. So the inverse of a matrix, let's take it from here. So here's the value. It says pivot on 1 in the first row. So let's start with this one here, with the first row and first column. And this gives the row equivalent matrix. So row number 2, this is what we're going to do. We turn row in number 2 into row number 2 minus row number 1. So this row, this position is going to be this minus that. So this position is going to be 1 minus 1 is 0. And there it is. 1 minus 5 is -4. 7 minus 2 is 5. And then we have to do it on the rest of it. 0 minus 1, it's -1. 1 minus 0 is 1. And 0 minus 0 is 0. Okay, so what did we achieve here? We just turned that 1 into a 0. Right. What would be the next step? This one says, if you go to the second row, this -4 here, let's turn it into a 1. How can we turn it into 1? It says here, if you put, again, row number 2, take row number 2 and multiply everything in this row into 1/4 or minus 1/4. So to turn this into 1, multiply every element into a minus, is it minus quarter? So minus quarter times 0 is 0. Minus quarter times minus 4 is 1. Minus quarter times 5 is minus 5/4, and so on. So minus quarter minus 1/4 multiplied to minus 1, it's plus 1/4, and then multiplied to this one. So this is now after doing this line here, right? Row number 2. So what did we do at this case? We turned, in the previous step, we turned this value into 0. We turned this value into 1. Right? So we almost, well, we're not there yet, but we have those 3 values 0, that value is 0. We have this 1 and 1. So almost those 2 columns are perfect. All we have to do is work on this column. We want a 0 here, a 0 here, and 1 here. How do you turn 1 here? You can say, multiply row number 3 into 4. Imagine if we multiply this row into 4, this will go 0, 0, and this will turn into 1. Well, this one turns into 3 minus 3 and 4. If it was me, that's a real obvious step. Did they do that? No, what did they do here? They said row number 1, oh yeah, so row number 1, take row number 2, multiply it into 5 and add it to row 1. Why? Here we go. So we're gonna take this 5, we're gonna get rid of it. How do we get rid of it? So this is, they've done 2 or 3 steps in one. So I'm just gonna break it into 2 steps if we can. So the first step is this one here. We just multiplied row number 2 into 4 or 1/4. So this actually turned into 1. And this is plus 5 minus 4. Is it? Yeah, plus 5 over 4. Yeah. And no, are we right? Yeah. Now see, this is gone immediately. I need to rewrite this stuff. I can't. It's too much to do it now. But guys, take my word. Row number 2 here is multiplied into 5 and then added to row number 2. So that got rid of the, say, this 5 here. And then row number 3 is multiplied into 4. So row number 3, yeah, that's the original suggestion. This row here, you just multiply this into 4 and this turns into 1. Multiply this one into 4 and it turns into 3. Multiply this into 4, it turns minus 3. And multiply this into 4, it turns 4. So we just, with those 3 steps, we're actually turned this matrix here, this side, into the unit matrix. And we ended up with this, with these values here. So let me take what that's there. So after turning this into into a unit matrix, this is going to be our inverse matrix. So the inverse of our original matrix is this one, minus 25, 26, whatever it is. So this is our original matrix that we started with. After 4 row operations, we're able to find this one, which is the actual, this should be the, this is the way how it's the power of the inverse is worked out. I need to format this into, where's the flipping thing for? It should be this one. No. doesn't matter. This is 4 to the power of -1. It's not 4 sorry, this is a to the power of -1, not a. This is the inverse. That's how, there it is. That's how the inverse is written. So just in case it's misleading, yeah. So the inverse is written in this particular format. So this is matrix A. This is the inverse of A. So that's one way of doing it. You can practice that on any matrix. But there's another way of doing it. Here's another example. Let's try this example here. And remember, just to remember one thing, is that some matrices actually do not have an inverse. So that's something you need to worry about. And we'll find out why or who. Here's an example, another example to do to try and work out the inverse of a matrix using the exchange techniques. So find out what's the inverse matrix for this one using the exchange techniques, the row operations. First, extend it by putting the unit matrix. That's the unit matrix 1100. And try to do the row operations in such a way we turn this side into a unit matrix, or identity matrix. That's 1, 1, and 0 on either side, like this one here, but we want it to be here. Whatever we'll be left with on the right-hand side, then it's gonna be a unit, it's gonna be the inverse. So how to turn this into a 0, this 3 into a 0? You say, okay, if we add row number 1 to row number 2, what do you mean? No, how do you add? If you add that, adding 3 times, sorry, yeah, I didn't see the 3 times, yeah. So this is -3. You can say, right, take this, multiply it into 3 and add it to row number 2. Remember, that's the multiplying operation. That's add and multiply and add. So you take row number 1, every element of row number 1, multiply into 3 and add it to row number 2. So 3 times 1 is 3, add it to -3, turns it into a 0. But then you do that 2 times 3, 6 plus -6, it's a 0. And 3 times 1 is 3, added to 0 is 3 and 1. So that's the first step. Now, because of the row of zeros in the left section, there's no way we can get a 2 by 2 identity matrix. So this matrix does not have an inverse. So A does not have a component matrix, a companion matrix, and therefore that original matrix cannot be really used for encryption because it does not have an inverse matrix. So some matrices, guys, do not have an inverse. So let's find out the inverse for this one using the operations. Again, let me have a quick look here. Right, maybe you should try this one, guys. Anybody? Do you want to take 2 minutes? Have a go at it, have few steps, see about 3 minutes and see if you can reach the inverse for this matrix. Do, please. I'll go through it in 3 minutes, but just try it using the exchange. We will do it later on using the determinant, but now try using the row techniques. By first step, your first step should be to put the identity matrix beside it, extend it to 1, 0, 0, 1, and then try to turn this side into identity matrix. And whatever you're left with is your actual matrix. So it's going to be your inverse. So have 3 minutes starting off now. I'll have a go at it without as well looking at it. I haven't seen it in a long time. Just write down the steps if you do reach any steps. Okay, so multiply that, row 1 times -1. R2. No. One, two. Okay. I've found 3 steps to do it. Anybody finished it? Anybody got any results? Hello? Are we still connected, guys? I just want to see hear the word yes. We're connected.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Let's see how this can be done. The way I approached it, first thing turned that 3 into 1. How could you just give me a quick attempt? How could you turn that 3 into 1? Anybody has any idea? What did I do? I took R2 minus R1. R1 equals R2 minus R1. So I just, let's say I multiplied row number 2 into 1 and or minus 1, or did I? Oh, I probably did something wrong here. How did I turn that into? Yeah, I did something wrong. Okay. Okay, if we turn, maybe if we put the 4 at the top, we can then get rid of it. And because we can, if I want to turn the 4 into 1, I'd multiply 3 into -1 and add it to 4. Okay, so if I put 4 at the top first thing, and then I multiply the 3 into -1 and add it to 4, the 4 will turn into 1. And I have to do the same on every other row. So what I did is wrong. Now this is okay. Here's how it starts. So we start like this, 3, 2. First, we have this extension. This is the unit matrix. First thing it says, multiply R1 into -1. So that's minus, just take -3 or multiply it into -1 so it becomes -3 and add it to row number 2. And that's what row number 2 is. So 3 times 1 is -3, add it to 4, so that 4 becomes into 1. And this one, multiply this into -1 becomes +2, add it to -3, so it stays -3. And this one, multiply it into -1, so it's -1 plus 0, it's -1. And say, well, this one doesn't change. Now, what else? Now, the next thing, they say, or take row number 2, multiply it into 3, and add it to row number 1. So -3 R2 where is it gone? -3 row number 1 plus number 2. So no, hold on. That's not very specific. Oh, so how did we turn this -2 into 1? We got row number 2 multiplied into -3, be turned into +3, added it to this one, -2 turns into 1. Yeah. So every item in row number 2 here multiplied into -3. So this one becomes -3 times 1 is -3, added to 3, it turns into a 0. -3 into -1 becomes +3, added to -2 becomes 1. -3 added to -1 becomes +3, added to 1 is 4. -3 into 1, added to 0 turns into -3. So we managed to put 1 there and 1 there. And we want to bring this into a 0, but that's not the identity matrix. The identity matrix is 1 at the top and 0 at the bottom. So this is the first operation, exchange row 1 with row 2. So we just turn those rows upside down. And then this operation, that's turning this -1 into a 0. So that's simple enough as well. Let's just say multiplying, adding that one to that one. 0 to 1 doesn't change. Adding that one to that one turns it into a 0. Adding 4 to -3, it's -1, it's 3. -3 added to 1, it's -2. And then we're going to swap those two. That's completely different to the way I've done it here, but that's fine as well. Same result as well. So this is one way of actually doing it. Now, once we have the identity matrix on this side, on the left side, then this is the inverse matrix. How do you know this is the inverse matrix? The two inverse matrices, if you multiply them together, they'll get you the identity matrix. So if you take that matrix and that matrix, multiply them, you get the 1, 1, 1 diagonally with zeros all over. Just like 8 and 1 over 8, they are the inverse of one another. If you multiply them together, the result is 1 in our digital systems. But this is in matrix systems. These two inverse matrices, if you multiply them together, you'll get the actual inverse. Okay, we can do a quick example of how to actually multiply these two together. So how do you actually multiply these two together? So imagine if I'm just gonna, okay, no, let me go back and get a copy of this, just to prove that these are inverse, because you might be sometimes required to prove that two matrices are indexed. So this matrix, I'll multiply it into this matrix. Okay, so it's A multiplied into A to the power of -1, which is, yeah, I don't have that. Okay, into the inverse. Okay, so anybody know what the result is here? I'll write the result down here. So that's equals 3 times. So you multiply those two values, this row into this column. So 3 times 3 is 9. I'll write it down. 3 times 3 is 9. And well, I'll just write straight 9. And then I'll get through. And then -2 times 4 is -8. -8. So that's 1. Okay. Well, I'll leave it just so students will see. So it's actually, that's what you get in the first element. Now, what about the second element? It's this row into this column. Okay, I need somebody to help me, so at least I know somebody's following me. Okay, will I pick a name, or anybody want to volunteer and help me, and then another person? Okay, Olotobi. Okay, so I heard somebody's talking. Go on. What value will go in here?
3 times 3.
3 times, hold on. We took this row into this column, and that's what we got. Yeah, now so we want to do this row into this column.
All right. -2 times 3.
That's -6, and then?
Minus 3 times 4.
No, okay. It's this row times this column. So 3 times -2, and this -2 times -3.
Yeah.
So how come this is -6 as well? That's wrong, isn't it? It should be one of them.
Both negative is
minus multiply minus, it will be plus.
Yes.
All right. So this is a plus. Yeah, I beg your pardon. And therefore, -6 plus 6 is going to be a 0. So, and I'll just have another. I'll do it again. So that's 9 minus 8 is 1, and the -6 plus 6 is a 0. So I'll put the brackets later, right, guys? So, okay. Now the next column, the next operation, the next row. So here it is. These are the two. Okay, so I'll just remove the equal sign from here. Now the next element down here, that's row 2 multiplied into column 1. Who's going to help me there? Come on, 4 times.
It will be 12.
12, yeah.
-12.
-3 times 12 is -12, and that will obviously give us a 0 here. Okay, in this matrix. And now the next, the 4 times this row times this column. So that's -8.
-8, yes.
Plus 8.
9. Sorry, +9.
Okay, thank you. I was just testing you. Okay, so it's, there it is. So I'll just put the brackets later, but that's actually what it is. So if you take any matrix, multiply it to its inverse, that's what you get. And you get the identity matrix. So that's the way it works. So if you're asked, to produce, or if you, for example, in an exam question, you're asked, find the matrix find the inverse of this matrix, and you did find it. How do you know if you want to prove to yourself it's correct? Sometimes in the question says, and prove it is the actual inverse. Well, then this is the proof. You multiply the matrix into its inverse. If you get the identity matrix, if it's there 2 by 2, this will be the identity matrix. 3 by 3, you just get the what you call it, the diagonal values of 1, and the rest of it's filled with 0. That's the identity matrix. Okay, so that's one way, guys, of doing it. So let's work out the determinant now. Find let's do it the other way. Let's do it by finding the actual determinant of the matrix. So this is one way of doing it through this operations of row operations. We found the inverse of this matrix using the row operations. Now let's do it using the other technique, using the determinant. Is this the matrix we started with? 2, 1, 2, 3. Is this the one we were working on? Oh, this is just another example. Okay, try to find the determinant for this one. The determinant for this one is simple. You multiply those two minus the multiplication of those two. So 2 times 3 is 6 minus 2, and the determinant should be 4, I think. There it is. So the determinant for this matrix is 4. Now, what's the is this trying to find the determinant? Yeah. What's the determinant for this matrix? There are two ways we found that to do the determinant. Either say select one of the rows and use it for 1, 3, and 2, plus, minus, plus, and you have the smaller matrix beside it, or it's probably easier to do it this way. Take the matrix, fill in beside it the actual, oh, this is trying to find the inverse, not the determinant. This is just another example of the one we worked earlier on. Let's go and do it using the determinant. Find there are more examples of doing the row operations. Okay, let's do it finding the inverse using the determinant. So guys, we've done an example of finding the determinant using the row operations. Now let's do another example of finding the inverse using the determinant. So let's try to find the inverse. How do you actually find the inverse of a matrix? They say it's simple. You take the determinant of the matrix, if you can find out the determinant of a matrix, and put 1 over the determinant and multiply it by almost the same matrix, but you reverse the A and D, the two values here in this column, you swap them and change the sign of those two of this column. And that should give us the inverse. So now this is how you calculate the determinant. We've already done it. For 2 by 2, it's simple. A times D minus C times B. If you multiply it into we change the matrix in such a way, we reverse those two values and we leave those two values where they are, the B and the C, but we change their signs. If they're minus, we turn it to plus. If they're plus, we turn it to minus. And that's how to work out the inverse. So somehow it's a lot well, some people find this because it's so clear what needs to be done. The other technique we've done with the row operations, it's so flexible, but some people kind of get lost in it. So if you found it handy, that's fine. If you found this one handy, this is fine as well. So let's get an example just to make this easier. Let's get an example. So first we have to find out the determinant. And once we found the determinant, we say 1 over the determinant. And we do the conjugate of we change the matrix and reverse those two values and reverse the sign of those two values. And that will be, once we finish the multiplication of this into that, then that will be the inverse. So let's see this example, how it's done. What's the inverse of this matrix? The inverse, just by putting, the inverse is like 1 over, like, remember if I say, what's the inverse of 8 is 1 over 8. And that's how you write 1 over 8 is 8 to the power of minus 1. So the power of minus 1 means the inverse, generally. So what's the inverse of this matrix? 1, 2, 3, 4. First, you get the determinant, which is 1 times 4, minus 3 times 2 is, so it's minus 6. So that's minus 2 is the determinant. So you put 1 over the determinant and reverse these two, or swap these two numbers, 4 and 1, and leave those 2 and 3 where they are. Just swap their sign, change their sign. So and that changes into minus 2 and minus 3 instead of plus 2 and plus 3. Now multiply minus half into each one of those elements, and that will be the inverse. So minus half into 4 is minus 2. Minus half into minus 2 is 1 plus 1. Minus half into minus 3, the sign is plus. That's 3 over 2. That's 1.5. That's half of 1. It's minus 1. And this is the inverse. So this is the inverse matrix. So this is how you actually find out the inverse matrix using the determinant. So we could have worked it out using the row operations. That's one way to do it. The other way is to use the determinant. So for now, I just don't know. Are we certain this is the inverse? To be sure, we should take the matrix. Maybe we should try it now. And multiply the matrix into the inverse of its matrix, and we should get the identity matrix, which is 1, 0, 0, 1. If we get that, that means this is the correct inverse. If we don't get it, then that means this is not the correct inverse. Okay, so maybe let's get an example. Okay. Here's another example. You should be actually working on those examples, but let's do it now because we have the time. So what's the inverse of this matrix? So in simply, these are the steps. Calculate the matrix minus, and this is using the determinant. This is 3 by 3. First, find out what the determinant is, and then multiply it into what's known as the adjugate of the matrix. That's the inverse, the swapping of the two values that I did earlier on. It's called the adjugate. So this is the adjugate of that. That's 1 and 4 are swapped. And these two columns, we change the signs. But if 2 by 2. So 3 by 3, the adjugate's slightly different, but let's go through it. So find the inverse for this matrix. First, let's find the determinant. What's the determinant? Let's take you can use any row, but let's use the top row. Hide, say we'll take the value 3, hide this row and hide this column. So you're left with this matrix, 0, minus 2, 1, 1. There it is, 0, minus 2, 1, 1. Multiply 0 times 1 minus 1 times minus 2, that's minus 2. Minus and minus change into plus. So the result is 2. 2, but has to be multiplied into 3. But anyway, that's the that's the original value. Let's get the next one. Get the 0, hide the row and the column, and you're left with 2, 0, minus 2, and minus 1. The inverse for the determinant for this is 2 times 1 minus 2, which is 2 plus 2. Oh, this one is multiplied into 0. Sorry, so that goes into a 0. So that's 2. Now, the next one, that's this value 2 here. Why did I go there? Oh, we could have done it that way. So Oh, they went in the long way, the long way. So by taking that 3 matrix minus of those two here, 1 times, I'm trying to look at this. So this one is 0 times 1 minus 2 and times that. And then this is the second one. Oh, they've done it for each element. That's way too. So if taken the second element 2 for hiding that and that, that's 0, 2, and 1, 1. And it's 0 times 1. Okay, so this is actually, they've calculated each item based on hiding, just taking what they call the minor matrix. So if you hide the 2 here, if you're looking at the 2 here, hide this row and this column, you're left with 0, 2, 1, 1. 0, 2, 1, 1. If you multiply 0 times 1, there it is, minus 1 times 2. And then if you go to the next item here, 0, if you hide this column and this row, you're left with 3, 2, 0, 1. So that's 3 times 1 minus 0 times 2. And you do it with the next item with the minus 2. You hide the row and the column that this element is on. You're left with the minor matrix 3, 0, 0, 1. So 3, 0, 0, 1. You multiply 3 times 1 and 0 times 0. And so on. So finishing each element of those, that gives us those determinants. Remember, when we said this one starts with a 0, the next one is given minus, this one is 0. So you keep swapping the actual signs. So that's what this 2 that we originally got. When we did the example earlier on, we said you start with sign, the first one plus, the next one minus, the next one plus. That's what actually here is happening. Plus, minus, plus, minus, plus, minus, and so on. So these are the signs that get changed. This 3 by 3 educate matrix is so horrible. But the matrix of adjugates, it's, let me get to this item here. So when we took the A, we've taken this matrix, B into this matrix, and C is multiplied into this matrix. So whatever the value that we worked out here earlier on, so we should have done it in one step, just multiply it into 3. This is a quicker way of doing it. So 3 into the actual determinant for this one, or the, so when we multiply these 2 and these 2, subtract them, get the value, and then multiply the number into it. So 3 multiplied into these here, that's minus 1 times 2 minus the other value, which is, oh yeah, okay, trying to figure out here. Anybody got this one? 2 times 2, that's 3 times this one and that one there. So 0 and 1. Why does this have 2? This has an error here, or no, I'm sure it's not an error because I'd have gone through it. Okay, there, maybe that's the way it is. Yeah, do they have it at the end there? That shouldn't be there. Yeah. Okay, it's the other way around. So it's 2, sorry, they have that first. 2 times 1 here, and 0 times, no, that's 0 times 1. I still cannot find out if that's, yeah, this is 0, 1, minus 2. And that should be multiplied to 3. Or let me get the original matrix. The original matrix is actually 2. Yeah, okay. So it's 2 multiplied into this, And this should be a 0 multiplied into this one, 2, 0, 2, minus 2, minus 1, which is 2 times 1. There it is. And that's 2 times 1. And 0 and minus 2. And this should be multiplied into a 0. And this one here is a 2. No, that's okay. If taken this element, hiding those, so it's 2 times 1 and 0, 0. But the element, I'm going to go back to the original one, and it should be a 2 here. So multiply it into it. No, why do they have? There's a mistake here. That 3 should be. This should be a 2 here, and that's the value that should be 2, and that 3 should be here. Oh, I have to revise this, guys. I have to revise this. So, okay, that's one way of doing the determinant. Okay, and ideally we should have been able to work it out. And then once you get the determinant, oh, this is the adjunct, so you multiply the determinant into the adjunct, and that should be the inverse. But let's try the other technique. Okay, this is one technique of doing it. So let me try the other technique of actually creating or filling the column. So I'm going to go back to the original matrix. Where is it? Is this the original matrix? Yeah. And filling in the next 2 columns, that's 3, you know, fill in the 2 items here to work out what the determinant is. So it's 3, you know, put the other column 3, 2, 0 here beside it, and 0, 0, 1 here beside it, and do the arrows up and down, left and right arrows. I don't know if we can, if it's easy enough to do. Let me get a copy of this, and let's try the other technique of working out. Okay, I should give this as an example or as a tutorial to do, but let's do it. So this matrix is going to be 3, 0, 2, and put in the other 3 and 0, the next 2 columns again. And then the next one here is 2, 0, minus 2. Everybody following what I'm doing here or trying to? So
Yeah.
there's an, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, good. And the next one is 0, 1, 1. So those 3 here are the same matrix. I'm just adding the next 2 columns, which is 1 and, sorry, no, it's a 0 and 1. So follow me, guys. I could do something wrong and I could waste time. So if I do something wrong, please remind me. So now, ideally, we should be getting now those 3 rows, you know, those diagonally now, those 3 numbers multiplied into each other plus those 3 numbers plus those 3 numbers. And then minus those 3 digits or numbers multiplied into each other. So I'm gonna write it down here. Okay, so the first 3 numbers, that's 3 times 0 times 1 is 3 with the plus. So everything here goes with a plus. Plus 0 minus 2, 0. So that's minus 0. It doesn't make any difference. Or plus 0, sorry. It doesn't make any difference. And
First one will be 0, I think. 3 multiplied
the
0.
first one is 0 as well. Yeah, sorry, I beg your pardon. Yeah, I was just testing you to see if you're following me. Good. And then the last one, what's the last digit there? So that diagonal is gone. 3 times 0 is 0. 0 times 1 is 0. And then 0 minus 2 and 0. Maybe if we spread them a little bit apart, they look less, you know. I don't know if it makes it any easier. It doesn't really, but. Okay, so it's this diagonal, 301 times 0 minus 2, 0. That's another 0. And 2 times 2 is 4 plus times 1. So that's the first number here is 4 minus. So every other number now is going this way. 0, 0, 2. That's 0 times 0 times 2 is 0. Minus 1 times minus 2 is minus 2. Times 3 is minus 6. So it's minus 6, which is going to turn into a plus. Minus this here, 1, 2, 0. That's a 0, right? And that is, in total, it's 10, isn't it? So plus 4 plus 6 equals 10. And I feel this is a much quicker way than look at the previous, it's the same example. We've done the same formula, the same matrix for this example, and they actually got the number 10 as well eventually. I don't know, where did they get it? Somewhere here. There. So eventually they found the determinant as well that we were able to, I think, the other technique is a lot quicker, a lot more determinant, but you can check whichever technique you feel is, like there are two ways to find the determinant, either by finding, if it's 2 by 2, it's easier to do it this way. If it's more than 2 by 2, it's easier to do it with the, with the last technique we did. Okay, but if it's 3 by 3 or 4 by 4, if it's any bigger, this might get a little bit more complicated with the sub matrices, the smaller mini matrices. So where did we go? Is this the same one? Yeah. So now the next step is to multiply. Oh yeah, to multiply then the actual matrix into the conjugate of the actual matrix. So this is where the issue comes in here. Yeah, again, if it was 2 by 2, it's a lot easier, but yeah, we need to calculate the adjugate matrix and multiply that determinant 1 over the determinant into the adjugate matrix. The adjugate matrix, that's where you get the value for each one of those matrices for each element. So here's the actual formula for, okay, now that's what we got. If you want to do 3 by 3, you need to find out the determinant, which we've done. So it's 1 over the determinant multiplied by the adjugate of the matrix. If it was 2 by 2, it's easy. You reverse swap the 2 rows here. If it was 2 by 2, you just swap those 2 and change the sign of those 2. But if it's 3 by 3 or bigger, then you have to find out a value for each one of those. And the value is, you hide that A11, hide the row and the column, and just take this matrix, which is A22, A23, this one, this smaller matrix, and find out the actual adjugate for this. Which the adjugate for this is you swap these 2 and reverse the sign for those 2. Right? So let's do it. So this is finally, we've already got the determinant. Now let's find out what's the adjugate. The adjugate are each these individual values that we put here for what's the adjugate of A. So let's find out what value goes in here. You hide that row and that column, and that leaves us with this matrix, A22, A23. So let's go there again. There it is for the first one. We hide that row and that column, and we're left with this, 4506. What's the determinant for this one here? It's 4 times 6 is 24 minus 0. You multiply that minus that always. Now, what about the 2 value? You hide that row and that column. You're left with 0, 1, 5, 6. Sorry, 0. I should have said 0, 5, 1, 6. There it is, 0, 5, 1, 6. Remember, that's a plus sign. This is going to be a minus sign. What value will it have? 0 times 6 is 0. 1 times 5 is 5. So 0 minus 5, it's minus 5. And with the minus becomes plus 5. What about the next one? Okay, Olotobi, give me the next item. Well, it's written there, but okay, so forget it. So with the 3 here, you hide that and you hide this column. You're left with 0, 4, 1, 0 with a plus sign. And the value is, you multiply these 2 minus those 2. So 0 times 0 is 0, minus 1 times 4 is minus 4. And so on. So you do it this the next item. So this is with 3 by 3 matrix. You have to go through each one of those. So now we have new values, 24, minus 12, minus 2, 5, 3, 5, all this. We put it, and we call this the adjuvant matrix. I don't know, where's the, oh, they just went for another example, I think. So once you get the adjuvant matrix, we already have the actual, in our case, we got the our determinant. We should work out what the adjuvant matrix is and multiply the adjuvant matrix by 1 over the determinant, and that will be our inverse matrix. Okay. So that's just how to find out the inverse of every matrix. So I think obviously we'll leave the rest of it. I don't know, what time do we finish today? Are we finished yet? Or do we finish at 1:30? What time do we finish, guys? Oh, we finish at 1:30. Yeah, okay, so good. I don't want to keep you for longer than I need to, but we have to try some example because we want to do just one inverse example. Sorry, I want to do some encryption example, and we'll need to have calculators with us. So right, okay, let me get some matrix, 2 by 2 matrix. We'll try a simple one. I want to get small numbers if I can. Are these small numbers? No, they're not too small, are they? Okay, well, let's have a quick example. Let's this just like a practical we do together. So let's get a matrix and let's do an encryption operate. Well, encryption we'll need to do no, okay, we can't do it yet until we do the modular 26 because we have to give characters of the English alphabet again from 0 to 25, and we multiply, and everything we get has to change into, it has to be a 26 kind of modular. That means we have to mod it by 26, and anything bigger than 26 will revert back to a number less than 26. So we have to, the whole thing needs to be done together in a complete kind of situation. So all the example or the exercise or tutorial we need to do now is just finding the inverse of a matrix. So you just do one example, you do it for me. And first I'll give you one matrix just now for a few minutes. Try and work out the inverse for me in whichever way you want to do, and tell us how you did it, and you can go home. We can finish for today. So let me see. I know at this stage people fall asleep, but that's it. We've finished what we need to do. So now I'm going to just give you one example, one matrix. 1, 2, -3, and 1. No, 2. No, that's. See, we also need to find out that it has an actual inverse. Okay, matrix identity. Good. Okay, I'm gonna give you 2 by 2 matrix. I may go back and share that. It's easier to have that thing there. So I'm gonna share the slide just so I can have a free slide to write on. Share that. Okay. Okay, here's the matrix. 2, 1, 4, 3. Yeah, no. 4 and -1, -2. All right. See if there's an inverse to this matrix. This is a matrix, guys. Work out what's the inverse for this matrix. In order to work out the inverse, you need to work out either work it out using the row operations, which requires you to put down 2, 1, and you put down the 1, 0 unit matrix or identity matrix, and 3, -2, 0, 1. That's one way of doing it to work out the inverse. And try to swap this part for this part, you know, try to make this part the identity matrix, and whatever you're left with on this half is your inverse matrix. Or, so that's one technique to do it. The other technique is use the determinant. Okay, so use the determinant to work it out. And the determinant, you need to work out the actual inverse is 1 over the determinant and multiplied by the adjacent matrix. So I can do that now. So try and work it out quick, and hopefully they will be an inverse. I'll work it out here on a piece of paper as well. So and I'll leave you to see if we can get it. It should take 2 or 3 minutes out of you at the most. So it's 2, 1, 3 minus 2. Come on, guys, I'm waiting on you. My advice, use the, for the time being, I think that, I don't know, it's up to you, whichever one you want to work out. So let's work out the determinant is 2, 2. 3 plus 4. Oh, not great numbers, huh? Adjacent is anybody finished? That's minus and that's minus. Yeah, okay. No, there's something wrong. Okay. That's correct. Did I put -2 there? Oh. Okay, guys, anybody got anything? Hello?
Hello. Yes, I put my answer.
What's your determinant?
It's in the
Pardon?
Chat box. It's 1, 2, 4.
Okay,
yes.
well, do you want me to do this or? Shall I do it, guys? Did anybody else got it? Anybody got the determinant at least, what the determinant is?
Is it 2 by 7, 1 by 7, 3 by 7, and -2 by 7?
The inverse. Say it again. It's, what did you say? I didn't hear you. Yeah.
2 by 7, 1 by 7.
Yeah.
3 by 7, -2 by 7.
Yeah, that's the inverse correctly. Yeah. Did you prove that it is the actual inverse? Well, it is. It is. Okay. Okay. Anybody else got the determinant at least? Okay. Let me do it using this. Did you use the determinant technique or did you use the row operations, row exchange? Whoever was talking to me about 2 by 7, 1 by 7.
No, I just multiply like determinant technique.
Okay. All right. Okay, guys, this is the way to do it. Let's work out what the determinant is for this one, like using the determinant. Right. The determinant is multiplying these two minus multiplication of those two. So the determinant is, I'll just do it on this side, determinant equals, that's 2 times -2, right? And it's plus, so it's those, sorry, it's minus, it's not plus. And it's 3 times 1. So it's 2, those two values multiplied together minus those two values. So 2 times -2 minus 3 times 1, which is, in general. So it's going to be 2 times -2 is -4. And this is, I should be doing this, yeah. Just so not mix up the signs. So it's 2 times -2 is -4. -4 minus 3 equals -7. So the determinant is -7. Now, how do you work out the inverse? It's 1 over minus 7. Okay, I'll just do 1 here and with an underline, so it's just maybe. Yeah, and so 1 over 7 multiplied by the adjacent of the matrix, which is, anybody worked out what? Well, sorry, that's the wrong one. Insert some shape, and I want this shape here. Where's the square? Square. It doesn't matter. I can't find it. I'm sure that it's looking at me. There it is. Yeah. Oh, can you write on top of this? Edit the text box. Yeah. It's nothing. It's straightforward. Yeah. So the adjacent of this matrix is you reverse these two. So the 2 goes down here and the minus 2 comes up there. So the minus, so first here we start with the minus 2. Come on. Flipping out. Minus.
So is it meant to be 1 over 7 or 1 over minus 7?
Minus 7, thank you. I was just testing you to see, make sure that you're okay with me. Thank you. Right, and remember with the 1 and 3, you leave them where they are, but just reverse their sign. So the 1 becomes minus 1, and this one here becomes minus 3, and and finally here's the 2. So this is the adjacent matrix. So I'll put down the minus here and just get rid of that. Yeah. So this is how you get the actual what do you call it? The inverse of the matrix. 1 over the determinant. The determinant is minus 7. So 1 over minus 7 multiplied by the adjacent of the matrix. The adjacent of the matrix, in the case of 2 by 2, you swap these two values. So the minus 2 go up here and the 2 goes there. And reverse the signs of these two values. So leave 3 where it is and the 1, but change their signs. So now if you multiply all this value into that, I'll go to the next thing. Then okay, just without the sign. So just imagine there. So if I say equal, so this is 1 over minus 7 times 2 is like 2 over 7 with a plus sign, right? So minus into minus is 2, 2 over 7. The next item is 1 minus 1 multiplied to minus plus 1 over 7. And are you with me, guys? So it's 1 over minus 7 times 3. It's plus 3 over 7. And finally, 1 over minus 7. So maybe this one is also I should have written it 1. It's better to be shown as minus 1 over 7. This is a better way of. So that's the determinant. Okay, so that's really the actual inverse. So minus 1 over 7 multiplied into 2 is minus 2 over 7, and this is the inverse. So this is the inverse of the original matrix. How do we know it will work or it is the right value? The original matrix is 2, 1, 3 minus 2. So if we take this and multiply it into the original matrix, which is, okay, guys, so this is the original matrix and that's the inverse. If we multiply them, okay, who's going to help me? How to multiply these two? Who was the last person talking to me who corrected me with the minus 7? How do you, what's the result for this matrix multiplied into this matrix? So you multiply this row into this column, right? So it's 2, 7 times 2 is 4 over 7 plus 1, 7 times 3, right? 1, 7 times 3 is 3 sevens, right? Are we doing okay? Is this correct? Anybody with me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, okay. So, sorry. I don't mean to scream. Sometimes I kind of get lost on my own. Okay, who is that? What's the next value? What's the next value here? What is it? It's this row into this column. So it's 2 over 7s multiplied into 2 is 4 sevens plus 1, 7. Oh, there's something wrong here. Is this 1, 7?
No, that is 2 over 7, the first.
This one, yeah, but
yes.
2 times 2 is 4 plus.
That's the second column.
Oh, multiplied into the, sorry, I beg your pardon. 1 over 7 divided, multiplied into minus 2, it's minus, right? 4 over 7. No, it's not 4. Should this be 2?
2.
No,
2
that
by
is
7.
2 over 7 times 1 plus 1 over 7 times minus 2.
So this should be
column.
minus 2. But that's wrong. It should be a 4. It should be should be plus 4 and should
the
be.
I think you should do 2 over 7 times 1.
Oh, okay.
Yes, that's
yeah,
it.
yeah. Sorry. Okay, so this is the one that should be 2. Yeah. So because that's 2 times 1 and 1 over 7 multiplied to minus 2. So if 1 is plus 2 and 1 is minus 2. Right. Okay. The next line. Okay. The next row is this row here multiplied into this column. So 3 times 2 is 6 sevens and minus 2 times 3 is minus 6 sevens. So one of them is 6 over 7 minus 6 by 6 sevenths, because that's 3 sevens times 2 is 6, and minus 2 times 3 is minus 6. And the last final row, this row into this column. So that's 3 times 1 is 3, and 2 minus 2 times 2 is 4. So this is 3 minus 3/7, and it should be plus. Oh, they should be a minus.
Plus 4, 7.
No, I know. Oh, yeah. It's correct. Yeah. Okay. And that's 4 sevens plus 3 sevens equals 1. So I'll bring the results again down here. 4 plus 3 7 is 7 over 7, which is 1. And the next column, the next value here, 2 sevens minus 2 7 is a 0. And the next third value here, 6 sevens minus 6 sevens is 0. And finally, this one should be 1. That's 3 sevens plus 4 7 is 7 over 7, which is 1. And that's the key matrix. So if you multiply that into that, you get the identity matrix, which means this is the inverse of that. So we worked out the correct inverse. And that's how to work out the inverse. So working out the inverse for this one here, for this value, 2, 1, 3 minus 2, we worked out the determinant, which is this column, 2 times 2. 2 times minus 2 is minus 4, minus 3 times 1, which is minus 4 minus 3 is minus 7. So the determinant is minus 7. To work out the inverse, it's 1 over the determinant multiplied by the adjacent of the matrix. What's the adjacent of a 2 by 2 matrix? You swap these two numbers. So the 2 goes down here and the minus 2 come up there. And leave these values to where they are, but change their signs. If it's minus, turn it to plus. If it's plus, turn it minus. So here, both of them are plus, so they're both turn. So this is called the adjugate of this matrix. If you multiply 1 over the determinant time the adjugate, you get the inverse of that matrix. How do you know we got the correct inverse? Okay, so we've done that. 1 over 7 is the determinant is minus 7. So 1 over should be 1 over minus 7. That's the actual, yeah, okay. And multiplied into each of those elements here, that gives us this value, and this should be the inverse of the matrix. To prove it is the inverse, we multiplied it into the original matrix, and we are able to get the identity matrix. Okay, so that's what we've done today. We were able to calculate the inverse of a matrix, and that's what we're going to be using. Well, next week, what we will do the inverse of a matrix, but with the correction of modular 26. So now we can do it to any modular, but we'll do it to modular 26, and that's what the next encryption algorithm is. So the Hill cipher actually uses the actual matrices based on the 26 modulus inverse. So we get the inverse, but the inverse is modulated to 26. So we're not going to get any bigger numbers. So we'll learn how to do it next week, and these are the steps. But we've done most of the hard work. You know, most of the if you've already done matrices, I am sure it's so easy to you. You know, if you haven't done it, all you need is a couple of examples. You work it out, and I'll give you a few examples to work them out, and you know, similar to what we'll be getting in an exam situation. But let's finish the 26 modulo inverse matrix next week, and we see how the actual encryption and decryption is done. So the file is there, you can look at it, and you know, you can we'll meet next week. Okay, guys, so do a bit of practice if you can. Get a couple of exercises. Just find a matrix, one of the matrices on the slides. Try to get the inverse for that matrix. Go use 2 by 2. You know, 3 by 3 are a little bit time consuming, but hopefully you should be able to do either one of those. Okay, so shall we leave it till next week? Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, guys. Take care, and I'll see you next week. Best of luck to you.
See ya. Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.